and welcome to today's General James Doolittle Leadership Center Forum, Sustaining and Modernizing Ballistic Missile Operations. I'm Orville Wright, your president of your Air Force Association, and I cannot think of a more essential topic to discuss right now as we embark on the debate over the 2022 National Defense Budget. Advocating for dominant air and space forces is AFA's central mission, and our Doolittle Leadership Center reflects that commitment through events like this one, by increasing dialogue among airmen, guardians, and industry partners. And by doing so on both the national and local levels, we build better partnerships and make each other better informed. And by doing that, we build a stronger nation. America's first intercontinental ballistic missile went on alert at Vandenberg Air Force Base in October 1959, 62 years ago. Ever since, our missile forces have provided unparalleled deterrent power. So powerful, a missile force cannot be ignored in any nation's calculus to challenge the United States of America or its allies. Today, 400 of these missiles stand ready, 24/7, 365 days a year, manned by highly trained, dedicated, and courageous airmen. Yet, such sophisticated weapons cannot be taken for granted. Sustaining our aging missile fleet is growing harder. And while plans are underway to replace and modernize those systems, we must maintain and sustain them until new weapons are ready to be fielded. Doing both at one time, sustainment and modernization, is among the most daunting challenges of our time. Today, we'll hear from distinguished leaders and experts who will help us unwrap and understand these strategic and operational challenges. We'll hear from General Tim Ray, who leads Air Force Global Strike Command, Major General Anthony Genetempo, commander of the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, and additional experts from industry and the government who will add their experience, insights, and expertise to this discussion. We will also be coming to you live from across all our great country, from Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico, Hill Air Force Base, Utah, and AFA's Doolittle Leadership Center just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. Making all this possible are our generous sponsors, I2S2, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Mantech. Now, to kick off our conference, let's welcome Representative Blake Moore, a stalwart supporter of national defense who represents Utah's 1st Congressional District.
I'm Representative Blake Moore from Utah's 1st Congressional District, home to Hill Air Force Base and America's next generation of nuclear deterrence. I also serve on the House Armed Services Committee, where I advocate for the 1st District and our national defense interests. I believe that the ground-based strategic deterrent is an investment towards a safe and secure future. This weapon system is the cornerstone of nuclear modernization efforts, foundational to the protection of both American soil and our allies abroad. GBSD provides a revolutionary cyber resilience, a 3-rocket propulsion system, and a modern defendable command and control system. For over 60 years, the nuclear triad has successfully deterred armed conflict and helped maintain world peace. Each leg of the triad provides its own distinctive and complementary qualities. Collectively, the triad guarantees that no adversarial attack is capable of eliminating the United States' ability to respond with decisive and proportionate force. An equivalent dyad of only bombers and submarines would leave us more vulnerable, and it would be far more expensive. I'm proud of the challenging depot work the men and women of Ogden Air Logistics Complex do to maintain the Minuteman III missile system. This weapon system was first put into the ground in 1973. While it was intended to serve for only 10 years, it has now been operating for 48. During a recent visit to Hill Air Force Base, I learned the blueprints for many components of the Minuteman III no longer even exist. As U.S. Strategic Command Admiral Richards said earlier this year, it's getting past the point of merely losing cost effectiveness to extending the life of Minuteman III. We are quickly getting to the point where we can't do it at all. As we await the release of the President's budget, I am aware of the challenges ahead of the Department of Defense in addressing our military's diverse needs with finite resources. including fighting the global war on terror and addressing vulnerabilities in our supply chains caused by COVID-19. Regardless, it is abundantly clear that nuclear modernization cannot be delayed. With the start of a new administration, I caution against additional redundant studies or reviews for our nuclear capabilities. Our adversaries are performing no such studies and are aggressively modernizing their nuclear arsenals at an alarming pace. The idea that our current missile systems do not need modernization ignores the fact that the land-based leg of the Triad continues to be the most responsive and affordable leg of the nuclear triad. In an era of great power competition, we must act decisively and immediately in order to maintain America's competitive edge. When asked to pay for nuclear modernization while visiting troops in Minot, North Dakota in September 2017, then Secretary of Defense Mattis replied, "America can afford survival." Looking at nuclear modernization through that lens, Congress is asked to pay a small price to guarantee a safe and secure future. I am committed to advocating for the GBSD program and the nuclear modernization on the Armed Services Committee, not because this great work is happening in my district, but because our American way of life depends on it. Thank you for your service to the Air Force and to our nation.
Where is possible? Past the edge of convention, beyond the boundaries of tomorrow, where no idea is too bold and no challenge too great. It's here where we break free from what is to what could be. Because defining the future is impossible until it's not.
Look, sweetheart, Daddy worked on that.
Wow!
I want your dreams to soar just like that rocket.
From here, we monitor the spacecraft and help the astronauts get home.
Dad, this is awesome.
You can become anything you want. The sky's the limit.
Do you have what it takes?
Well, thank you so much to Congressman Moore. It is our honor, in fact, to thank you virtually from AFA's Doolittle Leadership Center. We are also very honored to be joined today here by an incredible airman and a powerful and articulate voice and intellect who has given the past 3 decades of his life to serving his country. General Tim Ray, Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, joins us today from his headquarters at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. General Ray commands 2/3 of America's nuclear triad, every American bomber, and every one of our nation's land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. As commander of Global Strike Command, he leads more than 33,000 exemplary professionals, representing 2 numbered air forces, 11 active duty, guard, and reserve wings, the Joint Global Strike Operations Center, and the Nuclear Command and Control and Communications Center. General Ray, thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Sir, to kick off today, let me throw out a question or two, and I appreciate your response so much. You're responsible for 2 legs of the U.S. nuclear triad. Why do we still need 3 nuclear options?
Well, that's a question that keeps coming up, and I think when we think about who we are in the world and we think about the world we're in, you always have to reflect and make sure you've got it right. The process of questioning it, I think, is proper and healthy. And when we look back at the 2008 Nuclear Posture Review by then President Obama, the evaluation of the world we were in, the requirements that they stated there, illuminated a little bit further with President Trump, and then now we find ourselves in 2021 with arguably a more unstable world, far greater, I guess, dimensions of competition, potential conflict with two very capable nuclear armed adversaries, more than we've seen in past decades. So I like to think about this triad question as making sure you have the right context. You can narrow your focus down close enough on anything and draw whatever conclusions that you want, but really you have to think about this in the right context. It has to be thought of in the context of a very capable and modernized Russian triad with some extra bells and whistles, as I would call it. You have to look at it very much in the context of a rapidly growing, far more capable Chinese triad, and with a country that has great technical capability and capacity, intellectually, infrastructure, you name it. They've got the resources to continue to go fast, but it absolutely lives in the minds of our partners and allies because of the world order and the way things work. I like to tell the team here that this is the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world. And I think when that's considered, you realize, what we do to help our partners and allies around the world, the role we play as a leader, one we've played since World War II. And, and it's really an important dimension of how we really need to think about the strategic setting across the globe and how we do things. So you could talk about the attributes, the responsiveness, the survivability. We could talk about the flexibility and the visible pieces. Those are important attributes, but it's really the context that counts. And I think there's no shift in a more benign dimension of our environment right now. And so I just can't come up with another conclusion that we need to continue to press very hard on this.
Thanks, sir. And I would just offer thanks to you and your force today. The ongoing discussions led by our own President or Commander-in-Chief in Europe are very much founded on the strength of Global Strike Command. And we can't thank you and all of the members of Global Strike Command enough, airmen and civilians, officers and NCOs. So the next question, so what is the state, as you would describe it, of the current ICBM force in terms of both the missiles themselves and the infrastructure that supports them?
I'm going to turn it just a little on you. I'll add one dimension of this, and we can talk more about it, but the people part of this is very much a people business, and man, am I proud of these people. They have done phenomenal work. They have absolutely shined during COVID. They made it look easy, and what they do for the command and control side of things, the security side of things, the ops, the maintenance, be it ICBMs or the bomber team. Man, if you go visit these units, you'll see a lot of pride and pluck. You'll see a lot of pumped up folks. I mean, they know they're relevant and they know they're a big part of what's going on. So I think that particular blessing that we have is really making the difference. And the American Airman's always going to try to find a way to make it work. I think we owe that crowd of people a fighting chance, if I could. And I think that's the right way to come at this, not just for the strategic part of the things that we're talking about in the first question, but how we give the young people of America today the chance to do their best in this no-fail mission. That said, there's a lot of old stuff out there, and I'm sure a lot of the young guys would include me with them. But you look at the ICBM, as you pointed out the numbers and the dates and the time. There are those who want to talk about, extending this missile out to the future. Perhaps there's an argument about the time frame that we want to extend it. It really isn't the amount of time we want to go forward. It's the time we've already covered. So far from the baseline, so far from industry, so far from all those things. That just makes it really, really hard to do. And there's a great industry out there, but we can't throw them an impossible task of bring me parts for a very old ICBM that's it's done its job. Decades pass. So I see the team hanging on in the short term, doing really well. We do have some help, but there's just going to run out of time and capacity with a lack of parts and a lack of vendors. And so you'll have the breakage, you'll have the lack of parts, and then you'll have an operational dimension that you have to think about the complexity of the threats and what we're up against. You really don't have any margin left in the ICBM that we have in the field. So, in the B-52, it's old, but it's got a lot of game left in it, but we're going to have to invest there. And what we're doing with the other two bombers has been tremendous. It's been a little bit of a tough go for my poor B-1 teammates, but we have. Let me just right here now sing out the praises of Material Command and the Life Center, the Life Cycle Maintenance Center, the LCMC team out there, and the program office are just Herculean what they're doing. I'm really proud of them and the relationship we have. We will hang on and do what we need to do. And what helps is the promise of what's coming and really how well that's being done. We've got the best programs, we have the best program managers, and so I'm pretty happy to see the team carry through in the short term. I'm really encouraged by what's on the horizon, and I think that keeps the team in the field, doing a great job.
Well, thanks, sir. As you provided a great overview here of infrastructure implications, if you will, including the very important support that our airmen deserve at every missile site. Could you provide us a bit more insight to the operational impact on the life of and what the aging infrastructure and aging missiles really mean to deterrence and to your capability? And just some examples, maybe some anecdotes on how you keep sustaining this aged capability as technology changes.
Yeah, great question about the infrastructure side of things. Obviously you can look at the silo for the ICBM, and you can look at the alert facility, and there are those kind of immediate challenges, how things time out, and how they break or how they're fixable and how resilient they are, right? So weather's been a challenge. It's been an interesting couple of years here, but as you deal with the kind of the decay, as we do what we call a depot review and update of each of these locations, we just don't have the parts to do all of it. We do most of it, and we breathe some life back into it. But that's one part of it. The command and control is another part of it that needs continuous modernization and to really bridge ourselves to the future. But I think for us as a nation to step back and understand it's the test infrastructure, it's the depots, it's the human capital inside of those facilities, it's the technology that's being applied, and how well we do that, because all those things add up, and if any of them are really not capable, we're gonna have a hard time. The logistical and sustainment capacity to find and build parts and put them in play, and certainly all that plays for the aircraft side of things too. What's your test throughput? I think on the ICBM side of things, we're pretty comfortable that it's a fairly solid test capability. A few things we need to bring in with GBSD that'll make life easier, but when I just step back and look at all those things, they all need a lot of time and attention, and new technology can help us do that.
Thanks, sir. As you also noted, the nation for some years, for many reasons, had put off decisions on modernization, really for decades. At what point would you offer do we reach a critical inflection point where we no longer have any really viable options to keep the Triad ready?
There's two layers of that, right? So you could talk procedurally about the timing, and I would tell you 2015, 2016, we went to to a fork in the road, and we took the modernization, not a sustainment side. To go back would just put us in a bigger gap. But I think what's fair to everybody out there is that we have a difficult world, and there's a lot of things that our government has to work on. We had the luxury of a time and a place where we had to go shift our time and resources to other priorities, and that was just a risk calculus. So there's not condemnation in that. It's just now a very real challenge as we pivot away from the counterterrorism in the Middle East, and we look at now a very rapidly growing China, a very capable Russia. It's just a shift, and so we're at that inflection point now. In my testimony to the Senate, there was the question about how much time was in the testimony, and then how much time do we have? And I said we're out of time, and it's kind of a funny exchange with the senator, but no, we're out of time to modernize this ICBM. And what I really, really do appreciate is how well our acquisition community has thought about this for years, to bring in the models-based systems engineering, to bring in, what I would tell you is just tremendous software development, leading edge. We've had some very good discussions with the Office of the Secretary of Defense's staff, the acquisition, sustainment, and the research and engineering parts of it, and leading edge thinking. And so I believe it really is an alignment where we did have a chance to buy a little risk as a nation, but we had a good program. We made a good decision back in the 2015 timeframe. Now it's time to just keep our foot on the gas with what is an outstanding acquisition effort, and I think that's going to serve the nation and our partners and allies well.
Sure. Shifting to the bomber force, and in many ways, the backbone of your bomber force remains the B-52. Our buffs date back to an original design in the 50s and 60s. And as the Air Force projects keeping some in service until they're nearly 100 years old, how can we do that with airplanes, but not missiles in silos?
Yeah, that's a really good question and good insight. I think, I consider parts availability and reliability. And when you think about an ICBM, you use an ICBM every day. You just don't fly it. You use it every day for deterrence. You manage the guidance systems and the communication systems, but you don't expose it to all of the environmental dimensions of employment. Whereas for a B-52, you do. And so we have good engineering analysis that tells us we're out of margin for the Minuteman III, and it wasn't built to be around for a long time. It was really only built to be in the ground for a decade. When they built the B-52, they just pushed all the chips to the table and said, let's make this thing as robust as we can. Lots of extra margin, great bones, as they say on this airplane. So, and when you have a part for an aircraft, then you have an airworthiness authority who looks at it and they evaluate it, and then you can fly the airplane and test it. The test approach to the ICBM is different. You only have 3 events a year. And if you wanted to bring on a new part, you'd actually have to fly test to prove that part. But that's not why we do that. So we go and validate that the system's still working and that we have the accuracy and the operational pieces. So they're really a different sustainment approach. I can easily build myself a digital image of a new hydraulic line for a B-52, and I can go put that on the test stand, and I can test it under its operational conditions. So I can bring airworthy parts to the B-52 with the engineering and the capabilities, and I fly it every day. So I think it's a little easier for me to keep relevance on the B-52 than it is an ICBM was built for 10 years. So I think that's the big difference.
Yes, sir. A longtime aerospace engineer told me one time that the reason we've been able to fly the B-52 and the KC-135 so long as we build them with slide rules, and we always round it up. And so just as you described, we've got pretty robust capability that probably will be good for another decade or two.
I agree.
But of course, we're also modernizing the bomber leg of the Triad with the Raider. The B-21 program sounds exciting. You've been up close and personal with the program, and understand we're getting close to our first flight. I know the audience will be very interested in what you can reveal today about how the B-21 program is performing. Kudos, obviously, to the Rapid Capabilities Office and Randy Walden, as you and Randy work so closely together on the program. So please tell us about the B-21.
It's awesome. There's just not enough I can tell you here and now, but I think you're really going to like what you see. Let me step back, a few more details. I think there's a lot of credit that goes to a lot of people going into this. I know for a long time, the thinking has been about adaptability being one of the features here. And so when you look at the GBSD, the models-based systems engineering, the modularity of it, the open architecture, mature technologies, and owning the tech baseline, that same formula is playing with the B-21. And, it has the same features. And I tell you, the relationship we have with the acquisition community on both fronts is good. It's a unique hybrid relationship we have with the RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office, that, we're thinking about the things that we need to think about alongside the things that they need to think about that they do well. So it's blending the best of both worlds. In collaboration with Randy, we came up with a product we called Accelerating Modernization. It's a capability development approach where we think about how we really capitalize on those attributes. And for both of those weapon systems, we're going to apply that same logic. And when we brief members of the Hill, they are really supportive of that. Our chief is a huge supporter, and I tell you what he has done to push us to accelerate, change, or lose, and the way he's focusing the staff, the way he's focusing the direction, and the way he's making the engagements happen. I'm a huge fan of how he's doing business. And so when he saw this approach, it naturally aligned with where he's going. And so he's been a big supporter. And I think as we continue this approach, it really is how we need to do things, where you don't change requirements in the middle of acquisition. You feel it, but you have a really, really capable pipeline on the back end of initial operating capability and those first lots of production, to where you can rapidly upgrade radios, rapidly add weapons, sensors. You could do a lot of things quickly. Concurrency isn't a problem, right? So we can really think about proactively sustaining in a very effective and competitive way. And so, the B-21 by itself is fantastic. Its features, its capabilities, but the real secret sauce, I think, for all of us is that we'll field it and we'll keep it relevant and very capable for a long time. And I would be very remiss if I didn't highlight my teammates in Northrop Grumman who have really been supportive of this approach. We talk about partnership with industry a lot over the years. We talk about teammates. This is an MVP team, and I think at the right place at the right time, it's bringing a very special set of programs to the table. So I'm really excited about that future. It's more than just the airplane, which should be in enough of itself a good news story.
This is a great opportunity. We've got a bit of a stage here for you and me to just flat brag about our airmen and guardians. So I'll go off script here a little bit, but you'll be masterful at telling a war story or two. Most Americans have no idea what happens in the morning at F.E. Warren or Minot in a pre-brief and before these unbelievable airmen go out and man or change it, conduct a shift changeover to make sure these ballistic missiles are absolutely reliable. And most Americans don't understand that we get the best of the best in our lieutenant force out of the best commissioning programs. These are These are the young men and women who scored the very highest on their SATs. They are the best of the best, or we don't let them do what they do. And it's a zero defect, no fail operation every hour of every day. Our enlisted force, including our security forces, are just incredible. So you've probably got some great stories. Let's just relax a minute, if you will, and just give you the opportunity to put America on the ground in that AFA is all about advocating and advocating for airmen and guardians and educating the public. Could you help us do that a little bit with some real war stories? I mean, this is tough stuff. These young men and women are playing in and winning the Super Bowl every day, I would just offer. So take it from there, please, if you would.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been around this business either directly or indirectly for most of my career. You know, I grew up in the SAC era, pulling alert, you know, and my deputy commander, Tony Cotton, was an Icbm officer in the 91st when I was in the 5th. We used to, you know, go at each other playing crud way back in the old days. So I've seen it. Let me just tell you right now, this is the best morale I've seen in the Icbm force in a long time. I can't recall better morale. And so I've been to all the bases, you know, and you always wonder if you're the 4-star, if you're getting taken to the special place. Well, they keep taking me to a lot of special places. It just keeps happening again and again. Through COVID, you know, we broke the mold on a lot of things. You know, how we chase, you know, our alert schedule. You know, we're now fighting as a squadron, right? So, but there's been an ownership dimension pushed to 20th Air Force, the 3 wing commanders and those squadron commanders to go craft the way we do this best. And we've been able to really widen the aperture. You know, when those young people understand, you know, that they are the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world, they have a free hand in it. You know, they're just running with it. You know, so COVID, they made COVID look easy. And, you know, those poor kids got tested a lot, you know, but man, we never faltered, and they know it, right? So they're really proud of the fact that they never faltered, you know, and so putting, you know, some of the cultural realities that's part of their recent history, you know, back, you know, within the last 10 years, but it's a different team on the field, a very different, very powerful, very upbeat, very focused team. You know, we have more weapons officers in the business now. We have a lot of great minds in the test side of things, which has always been a strength of the Icbm force. You know, the defenders are getting better gear, better connectivity, better vehicles. And so the entire game has just been lifted. If you've ever been out there to go see the tactical response force, you know, the people who are charged with, you know, assaulting a place to go recapture a weapon, they're full up carnivores. I mean, they're just really upbeat, focused, fit, just lethal young people. And I'm really proud to watch that happen. You walk into the missile alert facilities, and these facility managers, I mean, every single one of them is their own little creation, with their own touch, and it's fun. It's fun to go out there and see them. But now we can pull alert 7 days at a pop, and everybody's there together, and there's better camaraderie. So that's been fun to see here over the past, you know, year and a half, particularly with COVID. I mean, but one of my favorite things as the commander of Global Strike is to go watch a missile maintenance team swap out a guidance package or a warhead. I mean, you know, you're inside this payload transporter, and you're watching this choreography that's just precise. It has to be exactly, and man, they are just crisp back and forth. It's like watching an Indy pit crew, and you realize, man, that's a nuclear weapon. that's pretty serious. So, and I've yet to find a single one of those maintenance troops out there who was at one of those sites, and it wasn't just a case of extreme ownership. And so it really pumps you up to go see that. So it's been a fun time to going out there and watching that transition. So I'm very proud of that team.
Well, again, building on that theme a little bit, most Americans, again, understandably, much of what you do is classified. But given that, could you step us through a little bit on, you know, nuclear surety inspections and the level of of detail and accountability that we hold our officers enlisted to out in the missile fields. And if you might just talk a little bit about PRP. I think most of the public doesn't understand, how scrutinized and certainly held accountable our entire nuclear force is, from the missile fields to bombers.
Yeah, so that whole program has been, the core of it's been around for forever, that I can remember. But the idea for everyone is to make sure that we only have the most reliable and capable people working around these resources, and that they're healthy, they're emotionally fit, they're properly trained and properly resourced, and that they've got the right mindset about this business, because it's very serious. And it's the ability to keep an eye on each other and to make sure that medically we don't go down the wrong paths. There's a lot of rules that keep you honest, and so that program right there, I think, is it's just a huge part of the deterrent message behind this. Is you've only got the best, most capable folks, at the till today for the day. And when I think about the exacting standards, I mean, it's not easy with old stuff. To understand the security parts that need to be exactly correctly done. The command and control procedures are very, very precise. When you see the rigor that's required, and you see how quickly they move through it because they've trained, it's fantastic. And so our inspection process, I think, is much healthier today because it does look deep. If you go back to the SAC era, you were more afraid of the IG than you were the Soviets. And I think there's a time where we were more concerned about inspections than we were training. And we kind of had that backwards. Well, we've managed, I think, to get that reversed, and that training is robust. Training is difficult. We expect you to fail in training. But when you're under the scenarios from the Inspector General, when you're going through your evals, it's proper. And I think that keeps that right cultural balance in play. And so I work with the Inspector General for the Secretary of the Air Force, General Saeed, and he's very, very complimentary of the connection between what we exercise and evaluate in our mission. He's a big fan of what we're doing. Doing more with the security side of things, that's getting even better. As we work in the aerial side of things, better technology, more relevant exercises. And I think, broadly, as we shift to a more competitive world, then I can see where, more of that is going to happen in every area. And that's the appropriate way. So I'm pleased that inspection is tough enough, focused enough, but it's really not about the inspection. It's about the training and the quality of how we bring these folks up that I think continues to bring about the best of them.
As with any professional team, including even professional athletic teams, it's all about training and conditioning, I would offer as well. So could you talk just a bit, you brought up your industry partners, and whether it's the technical level of support right out at the wing level, or the kind of depot sustainment and support you get in a place like at Ogden. Could you talk about your experience with your industry teammates, industry counterparts a bit? Again, great Americans, absolutely dedicated. So a story or two would I think, be very interesting to the audience.
So it's a very different industry, I think, out there broadly from the defense standpoint. You'll see the big programs start, our experiences. You may start with a couple of competitors, but, they may not stay in the game to go and continue. Sometimes that's a challenge, but what I could tell you now is that it's allowed us to create more of a partnership, not in a classic sole source environment, if you will. You have the chance before you enter the next phase of the contract, because you can really refine the requirements in a non-competitive environment. I think that's helped us in a couple of places. And I think what I see now is you've got a modernization effort that's really important. And to really make the turn is that the old stuff that needs to stick around for the next 10 years needs more than just the classic sustainment engineering. It actually needs a pretty interesting layer of developmental engineering on top of that, so that when we take this old stuff, we may have wrung all the sustainment margin out of the current design or supply system, in some areas, and not in all. I mean, there's just, when no one's going to come and build you a part, that's just what it is. But where you can create a little more uh, beneficial technology to get you through that phase of modernization, then I think we'll be successful, right? So there's a careful blend of sustainment and developmental engineering to make sure we've got enough margin to get to the new stuff. And that's a shift I'm starting to see inside of industry. And I think, the right minds on looking at how you can take that old stuff and keep it around just a little bit longer. But I don't see that as a sustainable path, but a very necessary step in the short run. So, I think the ability to look at your industry partner and say, I'm not going to change requirements, and mean it, freeze the stick, so to speak. It creates a certain amount of stability and assuredness that as we go, we can focus all of our time and energy on solving the pop-up things that we need to work together versus, hey, I have a new idea. And so, there's a lot more support for that, and knowing what the real business model is. So, it's still capitalism. People still need to make money. They're not doing this simply for the patriotism. And I know there's a lot of very patriotic, dedicated Americans out there in industry, but it's how we bring more and more of that talent to the table. And if we can create the right kinds of things for industry that are easier to lift, or work with them over time to risk reduce, then I think we're going to be in really good shape. But I've been a big fan of the teammates I've had here in this past 3 years. We've come a long way, I think.
As you talk about that partnership that you have, and the 24/7 communications back and forth between those and Global Strike Command, who would help always better articulate the requirements, and then a persistent flow of information back and forth as you get feedback from industry on how essentially to integrate the most advanced manufacturing technologies or the most advanced weapon systems technologies. That conversation is really important. It's really what the Doolittle Leadership Center is all about. And it really comes around eventually to ensuring the taxpayer gets the most bang for the buck. You've been very visionary too along the way, as have those who have, many of your predecessors, going back to even General LeMay and the history of Strategic Air Command. Are you already thinking about training and how training, improvements in training, the paradigm shift in some ways of training around new systems might shift? So GBSD and a different way of training.
Yeah, so the big theme I would play here is that when you're living in a digital structure, so if you have models-based systems engineering and you're digital, you would like to know that you had a place where your data was authoritative. A lot of people look at the simulator, and you can have that for maintenance, you can have it for ops, you can have it for ICBMs, command and control platforms, you can have it for the bombers. That simulator needs to be working on authoritative data to where it's as accurate and sometimes more accurate than the actual physical thing. How can that be, right? So it's how you move forward. And I think that if you do it correctly, you can train your people faster. You can break up the tasks where there's enough virtual and hands-on. You can design things, I believe, that let you get away from a collection of PhD level specialists, right? And to be a little more generalist in nature, not throwing it all out, but we know right now that for the B-21, we're going to collapse the number of maintenance, Air Force specialty codes, the AFSCs. We're going to start with what we had, and we're going to reduce that because there'll be different requirements on how we sustain that aircraft. We have been, working for the here and the now. I'm really, really proud of the innovative approach we've taken as Strikers. We've got an engine test stand run simulator that we built on our own dime out at Dias. And we took somebody who'd never done it before, and we trained them to standards in a couple of days versus the 6 or 7 weeks. And, somebody never worked on engines could sit there and run this engine on the test stand flawlessly and do the troubleshooting because of the way we're training. So we're going to capitalize on some of that now. We have a virtual reality trainer for the systems folks now for the E4. We built that on our own dime. We've got a few other things that we're working on, but how we train people in the future is going to have that right careful blend of virtual, of simulator, right? So it's either a VR type of thing or it's a simulator, and then the actual aircraft or the actual ICBM itself. We're tapping into academia to help us do that. I've got a human factors engineering degree from the academy, which means that many years ago, I know enough to be dangerous, but I do know that you have to have the right behavioral science folks involved in the conversation, or you'll just recreate what you've had. So very clearly heading in that direction. And I think you got to build it from the very beginning. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, sir. Could we talk just for a few minutes about leadership development? So for your missile launch officers, for example, the best of the best at somewhere between the 7-10 year point get selected to go to weapons school, the Air Force Weapons School. That gives them then at the right point in their career the opportunity to interact with their bomber counterparts, fighter airlift, intel, etc. And then there's a career path, I think, that then evolves inside Global Strike Command or outside Global Strike Command for your missile launch officers. Could you talk a bit about that for hopefully those missile launch officers that are listening to us this morning? All of them very, very motivated, the best of the best, including those who will get selected for weapons school. So talk a bit about that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that when you grow up in the ICBM world, you get really good at. I think you get really good at command and control. I think you get really good at training. I think you get really good, at doing the kinds of things that other folks in combat systems do to manage combat systems, right? So there's I think a lot of utility to go play in other areas. Space will be an interesting animal and how it's going to grow. It doesn't intend to get real big. Perhaps there's a small chance to cross flow into that world. I don't think we're ready to have into the Space Force and back to the Air Force quite yet, because what General Raymond's doing is building something pretty special and trying to do it in a very intelligent way. But I think when we start talking about command and control in this business, when we start talking about, I think there's a cyber dimension that we're going to need to make sure is a very key part of how we manage the GBSD, to make sure all that's happening in the right way. So, and then there's always maintenance, right? So, we've upped the number of 13Ns or the ICBM officers coming in to sustain us to where we need to go. It'll be a different career field because, I won't go into the numbers here, but we'll have a fewer number of alert facilities, and there's going to be a different C2 structure. But what I really think is important, not just for the ICBM side of the house, I certainly think the weapons school has been a huge help for prepping, thinking, integrating, the different MAFs together to fight in a more integrated fashion. But I think, the test side of the ICBM business has been very, very good, both ops and maintenance. I have a higher premium now on test talent. So I want to know that we're pushing people into that business, because as you build new things, as you try to keep a very steady pace of tech maturation, your test skills are going to have to be one of the enabling things. And so, for every, 2 or 3 young officers that would aspire to be a weapons officer, I would look at one of them and say, I would really like for you to go to test pilot school. I would really like for you to go down, because I need a ton of talent there. And, you can consume air power as an operator, or I think what more airmen need to think about is, to be a real airman for the future, you got to be in the business of building air power, not just consuming it. Because building air power, one, it's really cool. I think it's just one of my passions, but to go and bring new capabilities on takes a slightly different mindset.
Well, thanks, sir. As you get ready to depart the stage, so to speak, one of the great stories that's not told, because sooner or later, national security, the nation's security, is all based on our warriors and our leaders. And in every way, you are that. So could you also talk about your partner in how you team in research and development and fielding of weapon systems with General Arnie Bunch, the commander of Air Force Materiel Command? Because while we haven't talked about AFMC much, everything we have talked about this morning is certainly all about AFMC, their own engagement with their industry partners, as you as the commander of Global Strike Command would define the requirements and ensure we have this unbelievable professional force, zero defect professional force to train and give America what they deserve in their safety and in our safety and our security and opportunity. So a story or two about you and General Bunch, and then whatever you want to say in the next few minutes to wrap up. The stage is yours, sir.
Arnie is the best of the best. I mean, I knew him when I was a freshman at the Air Force Academy. He was a year ahead of me in the same squadron. He was the boxing coach. And if you don't know, Arnie was Golden Gloves at the national level. He's quite the athlete, quite the boxer. There's another chapter to that whole story about a freshman on the boxing team and the sophomore coach. I'll take that one offline, but suffice it to say is I've known Arnie a long time, and I've really admired, his very personal dimension of leadership and just a true servant trying to figure out the problems. To have the good fortune to go be in acquisitions or in AQP, the fighter bomber weapons acquisition side of the Secretary's staff. I know enough to be dangerous. I mean, I know enough to make them cringe and enough of the operators to think I actually know what I'm talking about. But Arnie's always been that sounding board, that advisor, someone I just pick up the phone and go, okay, what do you think about this? Tell me what this problem really looks like. How do I think about this a little bit more effectively? And, for everybody out there, that happens at the 4-star level, where you ask for advice and to help me put in perspective what I'm really looking at. And I couldn't have asked for a better teammate. He is instantly there to help us. What he's helped me with the TF-33 on the B-52, to help us with the B-1, to be a teammate in base housing and the way that works. But he's to the sound of the guns and does the very best he can. So I'm a huge fan of Arnie Bunch, and I think we've handed him a really tough problem here in 2021 with an Air Force that we haven't invested in enough in the infrastructure, the people, or the resources that we need, and we're asking him to pull off miracles every day. So I'm his biggest fan. So
You get certainly the last comments here. Everything that you've talked about across Global Strike Command and at the highest levels of national security for America We can't thank you and every member, all 33,000 members of Global Strike Command for what you all bring to the fight and bring to the credibility of our deterrence, such that we can all live safely in this country. So again, thank you very much. And sir, closing comments are over to you.
Well, Orville, thanks for the great partnership, with your great organization. I think we're all far better off with you guys on the field. I also want to take a second to thank Congressman Moore for his opening comments. I couldn't agree any more than with what he said. And as you sit here, it'll be 36 years and a handful of months. And this is not what people in my family grew up aspiring to. It was a very different chapter. So truly blessed for the chance to come run this outfit. I think Mark Twain said there's two important days: the day you're born and the day you figured out why. And I think it was to run this crowd. So super proud of them. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Well, coming up next, Major General Anthony Genatempo, commander of the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, joins Air Force Association Executive Vice President Doug Rayburg. Anthony from General Genatempo from Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. But first, we want to share something about what we do here at your Air Force Association.
Welcome back. I'm Doug Rayburg, Executive Vice President for the Air Force Association here in Arlington, Virginia. Joining me from Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is the key leader who understands the complexity of sustaining and modernizing ballistic missile operations for our nation. Please welcome my guest, the commander of the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center and Program Executive Officer for the Strategic Systems, Major General Anthony Augie Genatempo. Augie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Doug. Hope I'm coming in loud and clear for you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Sir, you're coming in 5 by. Looking forward to this conversation. Now, I see you have the daunting task and responsibility for life cycle management and certification of nuclear weapon systems for 2 strategic legs of the nuclear triad. Now, your portfolio spans everything from the Minuteman III Icbm, air-launched cruise missile, B-61 nuclear weapon, and NC3, or Nuclear Command and Control Communications programs. In my opinion, that's a significant portion of our nation's nuclear deterrence posture. So thank you for joining me. It's going to be a great morning, and we have plenty to talk about. So Augie, set the stage for us with your assessment of and perhaps insights into maintaining our nation's deterrent capability, especially in an era of aging nuclear infrastructure. Over to you.
What a great opportunity and a daunting responsibility to follow up that great conversation that General Ray just had. I hope the people listening in right now were able to actually tune into that. General Ray has been an incredible advocate for the acquisition programs that are providing him the capabilities that he provides to Stratcom. I could not have set the stage better. And, it's been a real pleasure working with him, working for him. And I'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about, who exactly my bosses are and who my stakeholders are. But as you mentioned, right now, we have not seen a modernization effort in the nuclear portfolio for the United States Air Force in decades. And we are doing all of our modernization at the same time. We are upgrading our Icbm land leg force of the Triad. We are upgrading our air-launched cruise missile force of the Triad. We are upgrading our gravity weapon force of the Triad, as well as upgrading a number of our facilities and key subcomponents of those weapon systems. So all of that is happening concurrently right now. And the amount of growth, the amount of excitement, the amount of pressure and stress has not really been this high in a number of decades. No one in our portfolio, in our workforce, there are very few gray-bearded and not much hair on their head folks left that remember a time like this with the amount of effort that's going on. So keeping track of all of that, mitigating risk associated with that, that's one of our key and most daunting tasks at this time.
Boy, great start. In fact, on the backbone of what we just heard with Orville and General Ray, and then you add to that last week's testimony of the Secretary of Defense and our chairman at the SAS committee, I think you and I are going to cover a lot. So let me start with the fact that probably many in our audience really may not be aware of the Nuclear Weapons Center. So I'm going to break it into two simple questions, starting with, who are you responsible to?
Sure thing. The Nuclear Weapons Center is part of Air Force Materiel Command, and General Ray kind of talked about the relationship that and the responsibility that Air Force Materiel Command has for the bomber leg of the Triad, and I am primarily responsible for the Icbm force of the Triad, as well as the weapons that are carried by the bomber leg of the Triad. So I say that I have three hats, and I have three bosses that I report to. First and foremost, as commander of the Nuclear Weapons Center, I report to General Arnie Bunch, the Air Force Materiel Command commander. And he is responsible and helps me with the organize, train, and equip of this workforce to perform this mission. The next hat that I report to is where you mentioned my other job, where I'm the PEO, or the Program Executive Officer for Strategic Systems. So I'm responsible to the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, who's headquartered in Washington, D.C., for program execution. All of the efforts that we're going through right now, modernizing them, are run through the SAF-AQ portfolio, the investment portfolio. I have a sustainment aspect of our currently fielded systems that are run through the Air Force Materiel Command portfolio. The third hat that I wear was to the gentleman that we were just talking to, General Ray. I very much consider him to be my one significant key customer. I have been set up as the focal point for everything nuclear related to the United States Air Force that the commander of a Global Strike Command can pick up the phone and call and talk to. So I sit on General Ray's weekly staff meetings, just like one of his numbered air forces or one of his bomber wings or one of his Icbm wings. And just to be that inclusive, and for me to have the amount of interaction I have with Global Strike Command staff is something that I have not really been involved with or have had that experience with throughout my career in acquisition. I also have some other stakeholders too that we work very closely with the Office of the Secretary of Defense. The NOB, which is the Nuclear Oversight Board. We are a very key player in informing that deliberative and decision-making body on the nuclear posture for the Department of Defense. I also have a very unique relationship with the Department of Energy. It's one of, when we talk about joint agency, I'm the joint department, right? So it is the United States Air Force in conjunction with the Department of Energy that brings the full up weapon system. You can basically draw the dividing line, perhaps, where the Department of Energy is responsible for the explosive package, and I'm responsible for the delivery systems and then delivering the all up round, which is the delivery system and the explosive package out to our warfighter. So a lot of different people involved, but it's a very tight knit and synergistic group that I am in constant communication with from my level throughout the entirety of my team.
Yeah, Augie, you're right almost at the epicenter of the historic Manhattan Project. Let me expand on that some more. What you just said is, so from academia, perhaps even to industry, who would you say are some of your stakeholders, shareholders, and perhaps customers from those areas?
Sure. So Kirtland Air Force Base, located here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's only about an hour and a half away from Los Alamos, New Mexico. We're only about, where the Manhattan Project was started. We're only about 2.5 hours away from White Sands, where the very first nuclear explosive test was conducted. And we have a very strong relationship with the White Sands Missile Test Range. Located on Kirtland Air Force Base's Sandia National Labs, where we have a lot of collaborative efforts and a lot of integration efforts. Every one of our programs has a counterpart with the nuclear package, and the development and modernization of those packages have to form up at the very end to deliver a capability on the schedule that we have promised General Ray and promised Admiral Richard at STRATCOM. So the National Nuclear Security Agency, the NNSA, is located as a very large component out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I actually have a counterpart, a program executive officer at NNSA, that he and I talk quite often as well. So Albuquerque, New Mexico is very much a hub and center of nuclear development and modernization and sustainment activity for our nation.
So from there, let's still stay at the Weapons Center because it's important. Let's talk about your people. I imagine our audience would like to know how broad the spectrum of disciplines that you have in your military, civilian, and perhaps your industry partner workforce. What does it look like from your vantage point as the commander?
So you're right. We have a wide array of disciplines, scientific engineering in each of our program offices, where we're located at numerous different places. We're out in Ogden, Utah at Hill Air Force Base, where our Icbm programs are located. Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma has our air launch cruise missile, and the replacement for that effort is being run out of Eglin Air Force Base on the panhandle of Florida. Our nuclear command and control and communications is being run out of Boston area, out of Hanscom Air Force Base up in the Massachusetts area. The program office consists of a number of different functions of people. We have program managers, we have contract specialists and procurement contracting officers, financial analysts, cost analysts, budget analysts, logistics specialists, supply chain specialists. We run safety specialists, let me keep going, nuclear certification specialists, and then almost every engineering specialty that you can possibly think of that works with the larger engineering and expertise group that we have resident in our national laboratories like Los Alamos and Sandia, Lawrence Livermore. We utilize expertise at the MITRE Corporation and at the Aerospace Corporation, which are federally funded research and development centers. So our reach is very broad, it's very wide, and we pull in that expertise as needed to work with our industry counterparts to make these programs come in on time and on the schedule that we have promised and that our warfighter has set a requirement for.
If you don't mind, let us step in kind of a little bit in your shoes. And this is a follow-up question that was asked of General Ray. From your point of view, why is there a very large bow wave of nuclear modernization programs, especially those that are in works now?
Sure. I think it was the realization General Ray mentioned about 5 or 6 years ago that the decision was made by the administration at the time, carried forward by the next administration, that we have reached the end of the sustainment juice that we could squeeze. Okay, it's becoming very cost prohibitive to keep the current capabilities that we have. So the decision was made a number of years ago to proceed down the modernize and replacement path. So Minuteman III has been nuclear certified for quite some time, and Alchem has been nuclear certified for quite some time. And all of our aircraft with their current B-61 variants have been certified for quite some time. Now that we're doing all of those modernization efforts, we have to go through a recertification process for the newer systems that are replacing them. And that is what has absolutely created this bow wave. It certainly is an area of concern for ourselves, the Air Force, for the new Weapons Center, for the Department of Defense. And we've spent some considerable time putting a number of different practices in place, a number of different tool sets in place in order for us to effectively manage the amount of effort that we have in front of us, but also to give us a little bit of predictive analysis as well. If General Ray happens to come to us at some point in time and says he needs to accelerate something, you know, we need to have a handle on what exactly that means. And, you know, the analogy I use is if you envision this entire effort as a jelly donut, and if we're going to take a bite out of it at a different corner, you know, what side of the donut does the jelly squeeze out on that we now have to mitigate, right, in order to not make a mess? We want to keep it all intact. We want to keep everything on track. But we live in a world of finite resources, and we're going to have to be a little bit more adept at shifting them around to handle this bow wave and any other perturbations that come forward based on requirements.
You know, General, I saw in the testimony last week, for example, the question was asked about the research and development and the funding for that. I'm not going to go there, but what it really brought to mind was you're at the leading edge when the funding flows down. And I'm confident our audience would really like to know is, from your vantage point, and when the funding does arrive, how do you go about sustaining and modernizing these aging systems? A little bit of insight or peek into your process.
Sure. The efforts that we have ongoing right now in modernization are taking us into a new era. Using, you know, General Ray had mentioned our model-based system engineering, using big data and analytics to get after the various problem sets that we have. We are lifting that and applying that to our current sustainment force as well. So what kind of predictive maintenance are we going to need for the Minuteman III force over the next decade? And how can we maximize the limited funds that we have, or, you know, use the minimum funds that we have to maximize the amount of effort that we can get over where those funds need to be applied. With Minuteman III, however, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. We know a lot of things about the age of our systems and when things are going to start happening, especially on the air vehicle side. But quite honestly, we keep discovering new things on their ground systems and in our launch facilities and with our support equipment that after 58 years of service, we don't have a predictive analysis to know when some of those things might happen, right? We're dealing with things like rust. We're dealing with things like water intrusion. We're dealing with things like door seals not sealing anymore. Someone said to me once, or asked me the question, what's the one thing that keeps me up at night about our Minuteman III force? And I said to them, half jokingly, but to make the point, I worry about HVAC. And they look at me a little strangely and all oddly going, you worry about HVAC? I said, yes. I said, I have no idea how old those water lines are or how old those vents are or when that may or may not become an issue that we will then have to deal with and handle and apply resources to. And as more time goes on, the number of those unknown unknowns is going to expand. And that's why I believe the decision was made 5-6 years ago to go, let's stop trying to keep solving that problem and replace this with a system that we can work on that is more reliable, that is safer, and that is easier to maintain. And the GBSD system and the LRSO system, the long-range strike option, which is the Alchem replacement, are most certainly designed that way from the get-go, right? Very simply, Minuteman III was a 10-year weapon system that was asked to last 60 years. We are building GBSD to be a 70-year weapon system that we can maintain and increase its capability to stay relevant over 70 years. And that's a big difference in how you go about designing a system and then the value you get out of it afterwards.
I think you just walked us into a very important conversation, and obviously from ground-based strategic deterrence, the modernization of the bomber fleet to the B-21, and other parts of the Triad to include SLBM, the submarine launch systems and so forth. But if you bring it back to your two legs that you're responsible for, Augie, what do you now see as producing the best cost per effect? And this may be a little unfair question, but it really boils down to is cost per effect better modernizing or modifying the current ones, systems we have, or perhaps building new ones? For example, warheads.
Sure. I'm a firm believer in the analysis that was done in 2005 and the continued analysis that has happened almost yearly right up until this year as to what it is going to cost us to maintain the current capability for our ICBM force with Minuteman III. And right now, I just did not see the data that shows that is a cost-effective option for us. And we can lay that out in a number of different ways along a number of different lines, right? I think we have the data to back up that story, that it is more cost-effective to go down the GBSD route, let alone that GBSD is going to meet the requirements of our STRATCOM COCOM commander, where Minuteman III in its current state will not meet the future requirements that were laid out for us. So I think from a strictly a business case, I think the data is there that we can make that case, that the case has been made to go down the route of GBSD. And again, from the maintenance side on Minuteman III, we're constantly refining those numbers, and that number is doing nothing but going up as we discover more things as time goes by. The other thing that I appreciate more about GBSD, again, is what it brings to our folks in the field, our defenders in the field. It is a more safe, more reliable system, right? Now, that's not to say that Minuteman III is not safe and not reliable. It is. I have confidence in that. I think General Ray has confidence in that. But I don't think we're ever going to say that it's safe enough, and we're not going to continue to try to work on that for our defenders and for the folks that have to be around that incredibly dangerous weapon system every day, right? So a lot of the maintenance practices that have been incorporated into the design for GBSD make it a more safe and more reliable system than Minuteman III is. And that's something that is of high interest to General Ray, to make sure that his folks that are performing that mission every day do so with an assurity that they're working on something that they can count on and that they have trust in.
You know, based on my experience, especially through nuclear all the way to the B2 of today, you know, the backbone of all our nuclear posture relies on solid nuclear command and control communications. So now we're talking about joint all-domain command and control and air battle management systems. So how do they relate in the nuclear arena, especially within the NC3 architect that you're responsible for and sustaining?
Absolutely. I think one of the best things that we have done in Air Force Materiel Command and in Air Force Acquisition was to recognize that nuclear command, control, and communications is in fact a weapon system unto itself. And that determination was made and that designation was made only a few years ago. And that really enabled us to put a highly trained and dedicated group of people up at Hanscom Air Force Base and surrounding labs and infrastructure that's up there to really start putting their head and their thoughts around what that entails, what the pieces are, and how best to affect and control them and to bring them into the 21st century. Colonel Amanda Cato, who's the program executive officer for that weapon system, has one of the most daunting tasks of any PEO that I know. It is beyond herding cats. She's responsible for a weapon system where 70 to 75% of it, she does not own the actual hardware that belongs as part of her weapon system, right? So bringing that all together, getting all of the disparate entities together to focus on, to fund, and to move that effort forward is something that we are just getting our legs under us and running. And I think the recognition at the national level, at the OSD level, and at Air Force leadership level as to the importance of NC3 moving forward. Again, General Ray, I couldn't have said it any better, and I appreciate his words and his support. So the Nuclear Weapons Center, along with Colonel Cato as the PEO, are going to be lending a lot of weight and a lot of expertise to making sure we're incorporating what they need into what I am responsible for developing as the PEO for strategic systems, and that they are tightly coupled moving forward. But again, it's not just me. Colonel Cato deals with at least 7 other program executive officers trying to push and pull on that noodle to get those priorities lined up. So there's a lot of excitement. In fact, I'm heading on a plane up to see those folks and spending the week with them right after we're finished here talking.
You know, Augie, let's talk about the elephant in the room. In the past months, perhaps years, we've seen cyber become more intrusive. We saw it in the petroleum industry just recently. We've seen it in the food industry and so forth. So again, from your vantage point, how do you secure our sensitive nuclear infrastructure from cyber intrusion or perhaps espionage?
Sure. So for our current systems, we have a pretty rigorous program that is continual in checking for faults, vulnerabilities, and pathways that could lead towards places that we don't want to go and things that we don't want open. So for Minuteman III and for Alchem and for our B61 series, there are a number of different efforts going on both at the base and local level, as well as in the program office level, and then the higher command and control level. For our newer development efforts, they are absolutely key performance parameters that have been incorporated into the design of the system. So we are working very closely with intelligence in the area of cyber and those intelligence communities have working groups, periodic working groups established within each of the program offices, constantly feeding the latest intel, not only into like the design of our system, but we're also very concerned about supply chain and with our contractors and how they are protecting the development and modernization efforts that are going forward. So it is constantly on our mind. It is part of all of our documentation and planning. So the milestone B, not to get too acquisition ease on you, but a major milestone effort. Think of it like for a rocket launch. It's a go, no-go decision point that the ground-based strategic deterrent just underwent in this past September, and the LRSO program just had it this past May to move forward into the next phase of development. And as part of that documentation, we had to prove to a very large audience that we have incorporated aspects of cybersecurity, intelligence, and mitigation steps to make sure that we're protecting our most valued information.
Perfect segue. Air-launched cruise missiles. Let's get down to some actual weapon systems. You know, for our audience, may not know that the air-launched cruise missiles are due to be replaced in time by the long-range standoff weapon. So my question for you is, will the Outcomes or air-launched cruise missiles be phased out, and or will they be removed all at once and the LRSO take over as a weapon system?
You bet. Very similar to the GBSD and Minuteman III concept that we have, there will be a phase out and a phase in transition phase where we'll have both of those weapon systems in our inventory at the same time. And as production increases on LRSO and more of those come online, then we will be taking Outcomes out of the inventory. The whole point is that we are maintaining a level or a requirement level in our inventory that has been asked for by Global Strike Command and STRATCOM, right? We're not looking to drop below that capability. We want our COCOM commander, Admiral Richard, to have a known quantity of capability available to him at all times. There will be no break in that. So asking Outcome to wait until the end of the LRSO production run is just going to be, again, slightly more cost prohibitive. So we're doing a phase in, phase out approach on that weapon system.
I'll make the statement. It seems that you're inextricably linked to nuclear strike plans based on literally the movement of weapons and their availability in the arsenal. So that was very insightful, Augie. Thank you. Let me shift now back to the really the GBSD program. Really, is there or what flexibility is really being built into the GBSD program, really in case there is a change in treaty regimes? I know you're not clairvoyant, but are there flexibilities being built into the program?
Sure. Right now, GBSD is being built and will be fielded in full compliance with the New START treaty that is currently in place, and will be adaptable enough to move forward with whatever form the New START treaty takes in the future. That was one of our going in positions, to give General Ray that flexibility as to the force that he can field for Admiral Richard. So I don't have any concerns in that regard. As far as we're building something that becomes irrelevant at the change of a treaty based on what the administration is able to accomplish and what goals that they have. We have a nuclear posture review that is coming up by the current administration, which will be happening towards the end of the summer, maybe into fall. And that will possibly provide new guidance. And the whole point of the GBSD program is to make sure we are adaptable enough to maintain our relevancy and not have to go backwards or start over. We don't have time to go backwards or start over. And I'm very proud of our program office as well as Northrop Grumman in this regard, that we have a system that will be able to stay relevant regardless of the changes or the posture of the administration or the political environment in the future.
So I'm going to back up a little bit, but so what growing challenges do you face to keep dual portions of the Triad safe and secure? And then I'm going to follow up on an NC3 question of the same nature, Augie.
Well, again, keeping the two legs of the Triad safe and secure in the current fielded weapon systems that came online in an era where no one really could spell cyber, let alone knew what that meant, have been challenges to get those systems to a safe and secure place decades after they were first envisioned. The best way to address those challenges is to field a modern system that incorporates those aspects into its design from the get-go and allows that design to be modular and adaptable in the future. The Minuteman III design nor the Icbm design are modular in that aspect. It would, in essence, be we would have to, again, build a brand new weapon system in order to get after some key attributes of both Minuteman III or Icbm that we would like to change. We're not going to be able to do that. So we're moving forward with GBSD on LRSO, but that shell, okay, that basic framework is going to be viable for a much longer period of time than the framework of Minuteman III or the framework of Icbm. And we will be able to adapt. We will be able to take line replaceable units out of our major weapon systems, whether that be propulsion, whether that be guidance or navigation, or whether that be warhead. And we'll be able to adapt the missile that we have that we're designing today to be relevant into the future. So, I keep going back to the relevancy part. Relevancy is very much tied to being safe and secure. Okay, we are able to incorporate new things that we have, new upgrades that we have, new technologies that we have in a much easier way with how GBSD and LRSO are being designed, way more than the way Minuteman III or Icbm were designed.
Previously, General Ray and General Wright were talking about the no-fail aspect of our nuclear architect, especially the enterprise itself. And after what I just heard from you, and it's very important, is you're dealing with a broader enterprise from the ultimate authority, the President of the United States, and make sure that the President is connected to the entire nuclear enterprise through the NC3 system. So does the same challenge apply in your dealing with the NC3 systems?
It does. Especially from a software aspect where so many more parts of each of the NC3 system as well as the actual weapon systems are going to be software driven and derive their capability and their power from the software attributes that they have. You mentioned the 0-100% aspect of the world we live in, and that has been one of the most eye-opening things for me joining this portfolio, is that our end product has to work 0% of the time when we don't want it to, and 100% of the time when we do. And I don't think you can apply that standard to anything else that we do, either as an Air Force or as the United States military. There is always some level of risk that can be accepted. So when we talk about taking risk in the nuclear portfolio, it kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. How do you take risk in a 0-100% gain? And, the way that I've come to realize that and wrap my brain around it is that we can certainly take risk in the journey, but we're not taking risk in the end product. And I think, General Ray alluded to, how proud he was of the programs that he has fielding this new capability. We are very much at the forefront and cutting edge for the Department of Defense in incorporating 21st century commercial and business practices and engineering practices and software development tool sets in the development of our weapon systems of GBSD and LRSO and B-61 and across the board. And we are taking risk in those, and we are trying new things. And if we fail, well, then we're failing on the bench test, and then we're moving on to something else to eventually get to that 100% assurity of that end product. So I'm very proud to be part of this enterprise. And, just to give a little kudos to our GBSD team, winning last year's Packard Award for Innovation and Excellence, because they truly are at the forefront of model-based system engineering and incorporating a digital backbone. So much so that everyone in the Department of Defense is, heading out to Hill Air Force Base to see what we're doing out there and trying to learn those lessons. And that's very much a part of our culture too. Colonel Jason Bartolome, the program director there, has actually set up a schoolhouse where his folks who have been working and living this for the past 6 years are accepting others out to Hill to help teach and learn so they can go back and incorporate those ideas into their systems moving forward. So I think we're doing a lot as far as, again, safe, secure, modular, relevant for the future, and taking a step into the 21st century that's been long overdue for the nuclear portfolio.
I think what you just summarized is why we're having this entire series with AFA and our partners, especially as you talk about taking it to Utah at Ogden and so forth. So we're going to go into a quick lightning round, if you don't mind, because I see our time is coming short here. But Augie, it's been decades since a real nuclear weapon system has been fielded. Let's quickly unpack a few of the particular risks that you're trying to mitigate. And I'm going to back up because you mentioned it. Let's start with the president's aircraft. Any risks that you're having to mitigate for that?
There are certainly lots of aspects of Colonel Cato's portfolio involved with the Air Force One and the presidential airlift requirement. So we are working very closely with that program executive officer out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, currently General Ryan Britton. And, the tie-in there, as well as with ABMS and JADC2, to make sure that there are viable, but not the only pathways for nuclear command, control, and communication. But the more nodes we have and the more pathways we have, the harder a target that becomes for our adversaries to contemplate going after. All right. And that is the ultimate goal, because a robust NC3 portfolio and a robust NC3 structure feeds directly into nuclear deterrence and what actually deters our enemies. That's part of what I call, when they wake up in the morning, they do the math. And hopefully at the end of that morning, by doing the math, they go, today's not a good day to take on the United States. And we move forward in the world that has existed since 1945, right? That's my job, is to make sure those capabilities are in place, that when our adversaries do the math, they come up with an answer that is not acceptable to them to try to do anything other than what they're doing today, which is keeping the peace.
I like that a lot. And, when you're talking about NC3, I think you've just alluded to is all domains open, space, air, cyber, for connectivity. So let me do another lightning round. Certification and mission readiness of the B-21 itself. Any risk mitigation concerns?
Yeah, what we've actually done is we have personnel from the Nuclear Weapons Center, from our certification directorate, embedded in each of those programs. So I have a number of folks out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I have someone in the RCO program with B-21 that are working with the program management team of each of those platforms to make sure that the certification efforts are keeping pace with the acquisition effort, All right. It's not something that falls to the side or falls behind and needs to get slapped on afterwards, because that's where we then run into timing issues, right? They can get the weapon system ready to go, but if the certification's not in place, it's not a viable weapon system. And the importance of that and giving those program managers the tools where they can effectively manage certification tasks in conjunction with our team has been a very key risk mitigator for us, especially during this huge bow wave section that we're in. And we're finding a lot of positive feedback from that.
Let's talk about the F-35, because I think this is going to be an important component to the nuclear enterprise. So what do you see as the timeline for the F-35 to actually be certified for the nuclear mission? And then let me follow up on the testing aspect. Let's talk about the certification of the aircraft itself.
Sure. There are, again, a number of different efforts going on. I kind of get briefed on those every week. I'm in coordination with Lieutenant General Vic, the Joint Program Office Director, and we talk quite often about the certification activities. And right now they're going very well. To include the testing aspects, we just had a number of successful tests with F-35. The timing right now, I think, to get to full certification is probably a handful of years away with the number of things that we have to go through, but it's not something that I'm considering to be on a critical path right now. I believe we have what we need to do well in hand. The resources have been applied to accomplish those tasks. The aircraft are available to do those tasks. And it's just staying on top of it, right? It's just the diligence to stay on top of that. There's a lot on F-35's plate, right? And understanding what's going on in their world to give them appropriate feedback, again, as to what side of the donut does the jelly squish out on, right? Okay, that's a very large enterprise, and we are an important player for them in helping them manage everything that's on their plate.
So when do you expect F-35, and I see it as, and we all do, as a sensor platform entering into the system. So when do you expect testing to occur?
Testing's occurring right now. We'll probably get into full operational testing within the next 2 years. I would say probably the 2023 timeframe.
Yeah, very good. Augie, we got about a minute left, and really, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today and hearing your thoughts. So what final thought would you like to leave our audience? Because this is really important discussion about the Nuclear Weapons Center. So over to you.
Sure, I appreciate that, Doug. Literally right before you and I got on to talk, I had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of high school students that are starting a program, an internship program out at Tinker Air Force Base, and they're going to be spending a week with our outcome program office. And my conversation with them, as well as with a number of other people just out in our country, wherever I travel to, people I just talked to out of the blue, how very little our population, our citizens know about our current nuclear forces and what the nuclear triad is. I said, I explained to the kids, and probably you as well, Doug, you and I grew up in a time, especially me in New York City, where I grew up, that nuclear fallout drills in my public school were just as common as fire drills. And today, that's an unheard of experience that folks that are my son's age or, in elementary and high school today, they have no concept of and don't know anything about what our nuclear forces are, what a nuclear triad is, what countries in the world possess these weapons, and what posture that gives them at the table where all countries gather to kind of search for and look for their own best interest, right? That's what sovereign nations do. So the education piece that AFA is undergoing right now, I can't emphasize enough that there is an entire generation of folks out there that don't know and understand what the nuclear portfolio provides to the United States as a whole as a backbone for everything we do on the world stage. So I applaud you and AFA's efforts. I very much appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of what I know and what I bring to this table. And any re-engagement or continual engagement, I'm more than happy to do for you guys.
Well, thank you, Major General Jenna Tempo, and I'm going to take you up on that offer. But until then, fly safe to your next event. We'll now take a break to hear from our sponsors and return with a panel discussion on the imperatives of ICBM modernization. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Where is possible? Past the edge of convention, beyond the boundaries of tomorrow, where no idea is too bold and no challenge too great. It's here where we break free from what is to what could be. Because defining the future is impossible until it's not.
Look, sweetheart, Daddy worked on that.
Wow!
I want your dreams to soar just like that rocket, huh?
From here, we monitor the spacecraft and help the astronauts get home.
Dad, this is awesome.
You can become anything you want. And the sky's the limit.
Do you have what it takes?
Well, welcome back. Our next session today is a panel discussion on the imperatives of ICBM modernization. The Air Force awarded Northrop Grumman the contract to build the ground-based strategic deterrent in September 2020. The GBSD program will develop and deploy the new missile system that will then replace the Minuteman III. Today's world is growing more complex, and the threats continue to evolve. The requirement for a ground-based nuclear deterrent is as great today as it was a generation ago. Yet, the budget and programmatic challenges ahead are daunting. Modernizing is expensive. The technical hurdles are not insignificant, and the political environment is fraught with challenges. Joining us now are a couple of real experts who have been focused on this program and the GBSD program for a while now. Greg Manuel is Vice President and General Manager for Strategic Deterrent Systems at Northrop Grumman Corporation and Space Systems. And Colonel Jason Bartolome is Director of the GBSD Systems Directorate. So, gentlemen, let's start with some opening remarks and an update on the current program status. We're fortunate to have you here today, and AFA and the Doolittle Leadership Center can't thank you enough. So, Colonel Bartolome, Jason, over to you first, and then we'll ask Greg for his perspective.
Yes, sir. So thanks, General Wright, and thanks, AFA, for the opportunity to share a little bit about GBSD. I thought, it might be worthwhile to spend a little time with the audience just to take a step back and talk a bit about GBSD. We heard some great remarks from General Ray and General Tempo, but some of these remarks, I think, will set the comments that both Greg and I make and put them in context. So again, GBSD is a total system replacement of the land-based leg of the Triad. And so this includes not only a new missile, but a new C2 system, new infrastructure. And, it's a true system of systems. And, we've done a little math with my CFO, and if you slice and dice GBSD, a particular way, it rolls up into almost a dozen ACAT-1 programs. So when you think about the Air Force having about 50 ACAT-1 acquisition programs going on at any one time, the size and scale of GBSD amounting to almost a dozen of those really gives you a sense of the size and scale. Now, again, we're replacing the land-based leg that exists in 3 missile wings. And in each one of those missile wings, as many know, we have 150 silos. And for me, I always reflect on just the size of each one of these missile wings. So, each missile wing is the size, or the land mass is the size of a mid-Atlantic state. So, if you think about Malmstrom and you look at the state of Connecticut or Minot, think about the state of New Jersey, or F.E. Warren, think about the state of Maryland. These weapon systems that we deploy, and they really do behave as a single weapon system, these missile wings, it's just important to consider just the size and scale. Now, when we think about timelines, again, when we start replacing a missile sortie of Minuteman III and converting it to GBSD, that will happen once a week for 9 years. And so, if you think back what you were doing 9 years ago, when we start this transition, again, think about 9 years in the future, and that is the conversion timeline for actually replacing the entire sea-based leg. Really is both the missile and the submarine together. So it truly is a battle network, and that is in many ways the way we're thinking about it as we acquire it. Now, some people call GBSD a generational program, but I really think it's more accurate to say it's a once in every other generation program. So we know right now that the work we're doing together is going to be in missile silos for 50 years. And when you know that you're going to design and develop a system to be in the inventory for that long, it really does impact how we think about designing and building it. And I think it's important to note that the Minuteman III, when it came online, we only saw that weapon system being online for about 10 years. So it really does impact how we're thinking about that. Again, the timeline for GBSD is key. I believe that we really began the project about 7 years ago, sort of at the last possible moment, because the Minuteman III system is aging out and attriting. And so these are, contextually some of the big ideas that I think we'll talk about in our discussion today. I guess the size and scale and importance of the system has us really rethinking large-scale acquisition, not just for GBSD, but I think you're going to see a lot of the insights and learning that we're doing inside GBSD impacting other acquisitions. One area that I think it'd be fun to talk about is just rethinking the nexus between the operational community, the intelligence community, and acquisition. I can tell you that's been a really big bright spot for GBSD as we've laid in our plans. We have a big emphasis, as General Giantempo mentioned, on flexible design and modularity. I think you're going to find that GBSD is truly an innovation-friendly weapon system, and I think we can give some examples on that. And then the last couple thoughts is that we've really been working closely with industry to set the conditions for a healthy industrial-based ecosystem that's going to last for decades. And then certainly the work that we're doing in digital engineering, digital acquisition. I look forward to sharing with you all today on what we're learning about that. I don't think many people realize that the whole discipline of systems engineering was born in the ICBM with General Schriever and TRW, back in the day. And I think what you're seeing right now is that we're building upon that heritage. And I think with digital engineering, you're seeing a systems engineering 2.0 that is actually going to be bigger than just what's happening inside the ICBM. I think it's going to impact other weapon systems, and I think even the commercial sector. And so, General Wright, we're really looking forward to the discussion with you today. And now over to you, Greg.
Thanks, sir. Greg.
Hey, great. Thanks. Thanks to General Wright and Jason. I just got a few things to add on top of what Jason had to say. One of our biggest challenges is not our ability to modernize to meet today's requirements. This is really the challenge to ensure our systems are designed to be capable of evolving to meet the future requirements. We're in a different day and age of how we do and how we engineer these weapon systems, and it's not necessarily a binary approach. On this modernization we're executing today, leveraging the concept of open system design is key to allow for rapid and affordable technology integration. And that's an underpinning for GBSD. In the end, as General Ray and General Temple mentioned, these systems can't be designed to last for 10 years or 15 years. They have to be designed to last for 50 years. If we're going to invest the amount of money that it's going to take to modernize not only the entire Triad, but specifically the land leg of the Triad and then replacement meant through GBSD, we really got to focus on how do we ensure that we allow for a constant generation of upgrades to just naturally happen without a whole lot of impediments during the follow-on activities. If we then take the idea of what I just mentioned and then couple that with this, as Jason references, this close collaboration between Air Force and industry, and we utilize this next generation of digital design tools, as General John Temple referenced, and we apply the new concepts of agile software development. We actually believe that we can be successful in designing a weapon system that not only lasts for 5 decades or more, but will be easily upgradable as technology changes, as the threat changes, as the desires of the United States Air Force and the government, focuses the weapon system to maybe want to do something different or provide a different level or dimension of deterrence. So what this means is in a sense, we have to think about how do we digitally innovate or transform the entire life cycle of designing, engineering, testing, producing, maintaining, and upgrading in the future a weapon system like GBSD. So everything that we talk about for a weapon system like GBSD is all associated with really driving a new way of engineering the system. Designing, developing, and producing at the same time, and sustaining a safe, secure, effective, affordable, strategic deterrent system is just really what we're focused on. And our team that I have the opportunity to lead at Northrop Grumman is really looking forward to partnering with the Air Force as we work through the execution of this mega project called GBSD. To do that and to stay on schedule and on budget is something that we're all going to be focused on. Driving affordability into a multi-billion-dollar weapon system is imperative and not necessarily all that easy sometimes, but it's something that we're all focused on and partnering with the Air Force on. So, General Wright, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much. Well, the nation is blessed by the incredible experience that you both bring to building in decades the first new strategic, the land-based leg of our strategic nuclear deterrent capability. So based on your experience, first with Jason and then to Greg, when you talk to the taxpayer today, when you talk to Congress and those of us who are not nearly as experienced as you are in how you're going through certainly the research and development, but now at the point of really designing and building and fielding the new land-based leg of our Triad. What have you seen change in your experience that you can really relate that is exciting? That's exciting about how we work together, the new manufacturing techniques, the level of innovation really that's coming into your ecosystem, based on what you saw even 10 years prior to now. So your own experiences, you would relate that would be very helpful for the audience. So Jason, please, and then Greg.
So I think I'd like to kind of zoom out a little bit, General Wright, because you hit on a couple themes I think are very important for the audience. I mean, first, I think what is different about GBSD and maybe this time around is just a recognition that GBSD is truly a whole of government program. And I think that leadership, at every level from the Congress to the national policymaker level, all the way down to the junior officers and the young civilians and junior engineers and program managers in industry, it's going to take just an incredible amount of resolve, and it's really going to take everybody working together. I think one of the things we've enjoyed, General Wright, in GBSD, and as a young, well, I guess not so young, as a lieutenant colonel, my squadron command tour, and we call it material leader in AFMC, was my first day on the job was the first day that GBSD became a program back in 2014. And from day one, I think what we see is that, that whole of government national resolve penetrated the relationship between Global Strike Command and General Ray's team and the acquisition community. And I would tell you that the intelligence community was brought in very, very early. And what we've seen over the last 7 years is actually a phenomenal amount of clear intent from leadership, a stability in requirements. And I think what may surprise folks online is that we've actually had a very stable acquisition strategy for 7 years. In fact, when I was towards the end of my first tour, I remember briefing, Mr. Kendall, who was the chief weapons buyer of the previous administration, and really the course that was set for how it is that what we're doing with digital, how we're working with industry, how we're approaching this was really born and has been stable for 7 years. And I think that is different than anything I've seen. And I think that stability is maybe one of our best bets for success going forward. The other thing, General Wright, is a mandate from the department to own the technical baseline, and really a charge for my team to recapture the magic of General Schriever's BMO, the Ballistic Missile Office, and what happened when we initially got into this business of the Icbm. And in that mandate, it really forced us to rethink how we wanted to develop and acquire. And I think Greg hit a number of those key points. I think more importantly, I think it forced us to rethink how we are going to sustain this weapon system out to 2075 and beyond. I think that senior leaders are always excited to see how we're using big data and analytics to get in front of many questions that will help set the table for transition. It helped force our accelerated move to digital design, digital acquisition. I think what you see us thinking creatively about how it is that we partner with industry, how Northrop Grumman in curating the baseline design of the platform have set the appropriate conditions so that we can have a healthy ecosystem over the next several decades, with many mission partners able to innovate and make sure the weapon system is able to keep pace with the adversary. And then the last one is, with modern IT and what we've learned in COVID, I think you're seeing GBSD become a nationwide program office that is allowing us to tap into the skill sets and the expertise across our entire country. And it couldn't be more exciting. I think Greg's emphasis on flexible design, where I see it as a focus on modularity, a focus on design margin in select areas, a focus on diversity, has really, I think, helped show some of the key ideas you see from the chief in Accelerating Change or Lose, where we're designing a weapon system that's truly a battle network that will be a hedge against the pace of technological change. It'll be a hedge against the adversary and the dynamic threat environment. And, all of those things are really exciting. And I think that, all of these things have been paying off again for 7 years now. This enterprise, and a lot of credit goes from Congress to our mission partners in OSD and the air staff, and certainly the great work that we're seeing from industry, is that, this acquisition has hit every major milestone within days of when we said we would for going on 7 years. And when has that happened in the world of big acquisition in a long time? Now, looking ahead, it gets more and more daunting and challenging. But the last thought I'd leave you with is that I had the AFWorks director here, and you may know him. He's a great officer, a brilliant man, Nathan Diller. And when we sat down and we talked about GBSD being an innovation-friendly weapon system, and we showed him what we're doing with big data, how we're taking advantage of the modular design, how we're bringing in small business and venture capital into helping us think about some of the big problems, the last place most people look is in a nuclear deterrent as a beacon for innovation. But I think what you'd see, sir, and I think what the senior leaders have seen is that really there's an opportunity for this weapon system to be a value creation engine, not just for the deterrent, but for other really critical areas in our critical infrastructure. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind, General, as you asked me that question.
Well, thanks. And for Greg, we've designated GBSD as an E weapon system. So Greg, could you talk a bit, you are probably the expert in the world in many ways. So manufacturing techniques, sooner or later, you have to, bend metal, if you will. Things have changed a lot in your career. So could you talk, for those that are not nearly up to the level of sophistication that you and Jason are, what does that really mean? When we talk about digital applications or 3D printing, when you really get into building the metal and the pipes and hookups, the electrical connections, all the complexity of GBSD, could you talk a bit about what's changed and what's so exciting about digital manufacturing today?
Yeah, certainly can. And I'll start off by saying this is not easy. And sometimes we talk about all the good things GBSD is doing, but it is absolutely not easy. And we have a culture that needs to be changed for all of our programs to start working their way in this direction. But as General Wright mentioned, GBSD has been designated the first E-Series acquisition program. What the E program designation is where a program employs a thing called the digital trinity. The digital trinity is made up of those things called digital engineering, agile software development, and open systems architecture, the things I referenced and Jason referenced earlier. It's been extremely effective for the GBSD design and our development efforts. This idea of a digital trinity. But I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. I don't want to leave anybody with a misinterpretation or misimpression that this is something that you can just open up a box and go do. We talk about and reference this idea that we're trying to share information across industry and across our government partners on how to do it differently. And we are certainly working through the GBSD is working through the pathfinding of all those different things. But another key difference of what this digital engineering facilitates is a strong collaboration and partnership across the government and industry teams. None of this happens without the commitment of both the Air Force and the industry teams to drive the necessary cultural shift throughout the organization. We really need to drive this discipline to move away from and eventually eliminate the old ways of doing business and getting to the point of where we're living in the model. When we start living in the model, this concept of digital manufacturing comes into play. The concept of having the ability to have what we refer to as a digital twin, a digital representation of a product that is in place and that we understand it and we test it before we even build it. Back I started on the B2, back in 1983, and then back then it was everything was an invention. We're not inventing anymore. What we're trying to do is really take the ideas and the things that have been generated out of big programs like the B2, F-35, F-22, and really apply it to maximize the benefit of connecting good ideas and good processes with a digital capability or good high computing processing power, and really driving the idea, the concept of now you're digitally manufacturing it before you get to actually bending metal, and now what you can do is once you validate all the interfaces actually are accurate. Once you validate all of the inputs to a wire harness, meet the in or the output of the wiring harness. Before you even go to send those drawings to the floor, you're actually validating all that in a digital representative space. That way, you have a larger probability that you're going to reduce the overall rework cycle that just naturally exists on these large, complex programs. So we recognize that technology is moving fast, and through our digital engineering efforts, we're able to design and drive this system for sustainability. When we talk about digital thread, now when you go to upgrade it in the future, you have a digital model of everything that was built on the manufacturing floor, called a digital twin. So as you go to upgrade in the future, the idea is that it would be much more affordable and shorten the timeline to drive those upgrades. So in the end, this concept of digital engineering is a means to an end. It's not necessarily, the solving of world hunger. You really still have to produce the weapon system that meets the Air Force's requirements, and it has to be sustainable. So hopefully, General Wright, that answers your question and got to some insight into what digital manufacturing is.
Well, that's terrific, Greg. Like Jason, you're so smart, you can explain complex things so even I can understand it. So I appreciate it. Back to Jason a bit.
Yep.
Moving towards the future and looking towards the future, Jason, could you talk a bit about challenges and opportunities and milestones, a bit on timelines, at least an estimate, IOC, FOC, for example?
Yeah, yes, sir. Well, if you don't mind, sir, I'd like to just add 1 or 2 points to what Greg said, and then I'll talk a little bit about the next set of milestones. So, sir, going back to what Greg said, I think it's important for our audience to sort of listen to some of the statistics and some of the data and findings that we've seen to date. So I would say that our digital strategy started all the way back in 2014. And if you sort of break up our digital adventure, I think maybe, Greg, that's what we should call it, from 2014 to 2016, we were in the conceptual design phase, sir. So in that phase, what we saw was a great partnership with Global Strike Command, moving away from a traditional one-page system requirements document to actually a digital model and an architecture of what it is that they really wanted industry to design and buy. And we shared that design model with all of industry very early on, so that we reduced the ambiguity of what it is that we wanted to build. And what it did is I believe it gave industry a really great running start as to really laying in a solid foundation of a design. If you think about the next epic of time, which is from 2016 to 2020, maybe the last 4 years, we were in the tech maturation and risk reduction phase. And I think that not only do we emphasize architecture, but I think we emphasize the modeling and simulation that was really important to honing our understanding of what the requirements were doing in the design. Just to give you a pretty staggering statistic, we held with Greg and his team what we called the cost capability technical interchange meeting, where we brought our engineering models, General Wright, and our cost models into focus at the same time. And we asked industry to show us the cost versus capability of their design for every requirement. And as a government team, because we were also in the native digital environment, we were independently able to do that. And General Wright, we looked at 6 billion different configurations of the GBSD weapon system. And, you can't do that unless you're actually operating, in that type of environment. And now as we pivot to this current epic of time, we're now really are emphasizing the holy trinity of digital engineering. And I think Greg is spot on, is that we're learning so much is, building the appropriate digital infrastructure. I think you're going to see, General Bunch come strong about the need for the Air Force to modernize the IT infrastructure so that industry and the Air Force can actually operate in this digital environment. I think you're going to see, and I think kudos to Northrop Grumman being a first mover into, moving into the government furnished cloud environment, the government furnished digital engineering stack, and the software factory. And what that's allowing us to do is I think there's a solid business case for that, because we can provide industry certified environments that can help them move faster. It's beneficial for industry and my team to be able to see and watch the weapon system be built and designed over time. And to give you just a little anecdote, Greg and I's first real review in the weapon system was a 6-hour review in the model, where Greg's team basically went from message receipt, to the release of a reentry vehicle in the virtual environment. And both of our technical teams and our leadership teams were able to follow Northrop Grumman's design and architecture. And that happened within weeks of us really getting off on this foot. So sir, I concur wholeheartedly with Greg that we are learning every week and every month together. And it's just incredibly exciting to see this mature. Now, as we look ahead at major milestones, this week we're baselining the weapon system. So we have what we call the Enterprise Integrated Baseline Review, which is very important. We talk about a whole of government program. There are as many activities on the government side of the ledger to get GBSD to IOC as really there is on Greg's to actually design and build the system. And we've worked very hard over the last several months to baseline the weapon system. And as we emerge from that, we'll start CDRs. So believe it or not, sir, we're already in critical design review timelines for the subsystems, and we're months away from first flight. So calendar year 23, by the end of the calendar year, we're going to be at Vandenberg and we'll be flying the first test flights of the new weapon system. And in the virtual environment, Greg and the government team are already flying the design virtually. And we're already seeing its capabilities from a modeling and sim environment. So, sir, that gives a little bit of insight on where we are and where we're going.
Just to build on that for your timelines, so you're going to actually launch a missile in 2023. Is that correct?
End of calendar year 2023. Yep. Now we have a window, but that's it's not like going out to Edwards, General. So when we launch one of these things, it's quite of a conducting activity. But we're looking at the end of 2023 for first flight, sir.
Okay, and then any predictions on IOC, then FOC? I'm sure you've got that written down. It may be classified, but anything you can give us is great.
Well, so we're looking at, and we're tracking towards an IOC in 2029 and an FOC in 2036. And again, 7 years we've been rocking and rolling, and it gets tougher and tougher. There's a lot of work to do, sir, but we're still checking and tracking towards those dates.
We have about 15 more minutes here. Going back to Jason, starting there from your view as an industry partner. What are the challenges and opportunities that you see out there between now and FOC, really, given that the 2022 budget process is going to be like the 23 budget process year by year? Certainly sustained funding is important to you and your team, but there may be other opportunities and challenges out there. So to Greg, and then that same question back to Jason.
Okay.
Sorry, Greg, I think you're mute. Went mute.
I went now.
Yeah, good.
Okay. I think some of the bigger challenges that we're dealing with, and something Jason and I work hand in hand with, is resources. In industry and in the Air Force, we're creating a resource pool that hasn't existed for over 3 decades, and really reestablishing critical skills in things like system engineering, cyber engineering, nuclear scientists, rocket scientists, all the way to supply chain professionals who deal in this type of environment. And what we're seeing is a significant pressure on the system that isn't necessarily affording us the opportunity to find and establish on both sides of our teams the critical skills that we're going to need in the future. Now, that said, we are hitting our hiring numbers, even in this post-pandemic, very positive economic, low unemployment time, and we are doing very well in hitting our numbers and staffing up to meet a mega project like GBSD. Now we're driving, and trying to drive diversity throughout everything we do at what we call our hub and spoke locations. Starting here in Roy, Utah, which is just north of where Jason's sitting, outside the Hill Air Force Base gate. But we also have good opportunities in Huntsville, Alabama, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Bellevue, Nebraska. Then, as Jason talked about, we're expanding, and the infrastructure that we have to expand. When we expand, we have to have all these significant infrastructure we have to expand. These buildings don't exist. So it's not like we can just go take on a Minuteman III building and kick them out. We have to build all brand new buildings. So we have a massive construction project going on, not only here in northern Utah, but the other locations I talked about, but also at Vandenberg, where we're going to do all the test program, and up at FE Warren in Cheyenne, out of Great Falls, and then certainly out of Maelstrom. So just a massive amount of infrastructure that we're putting in to be able to facilitate and execute this program. The other thing that we're working closely with the Air Force is really trying to understand how do we invest in these future critical skills to develop this next generation workforce that's going to have to be in place to sustain this weapon system over the next 30, 40, 50 years. That's not easy. As Jason referenced, the Ballistic Missile Office that created this ICBM workforce that exists today. But they are, over the last 50 years, you can imagine the attrition, the retirement, and the aging that's gone on, that we're just going to have to really focus on how do you regenerate that workforce, both on the government side and on industry. So hopefully that got after some of the challenges, General Wright.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, coming off my mute here. So I think for industry, I think there's really two sort of dimensions that I've been thinking about quite a bit as it comes to GBSD. I think, sort of one dimension is, the acquisition and sustainment of the ICBM over the next 50 years. And, as Greg said, we have, I think, a very innovative open system architecture, modularity design. I think that when you think about GBSD, General Wright, I think an analogy, which is probably terrible, but it's useful for me, is I like to think of GBSD as a new baseline platform for the ICBM, similar to maybe an iPhone. And when you think about what modularity and the data right strategy we pursued does for you, is that we've reserved the right as the Air Force to put in applications on the ICBM over time, like apps. And the way we've done this is we've created, I think, an opportunity for there to be a very fertile ecosystem around the weapon system, so that traditional industry partners, as well as possibly new industry partners, are going to have the opportunity to really contribute to the design and sustainment of the system over time. The other dimension is a little bit not as obvious, and I would say that's sort of the dimension of kind of where I talk about sort of the meta design or the meta engineering of the system. And this is the domain of digital engineering, the DevSecOps and agile software practices, the place in the cloud. We talked about certification with General Tempo, but applications to actually innovate in how we certify the weapon system, how we do airworthiness, how we do cyber protections of the system. And that's an incredibly new and exciting dimension where I think what you're seeing in GBSD aligns with the Chief's vision and the Secretary's vision for AFWorks, and how it is that we can bring in non-traditional partners to solve some of these problems. And I think what you're going to see is that some of the innovations that are being born in the system are actually going to have knock-on effects to places like the banking community. I remember when I went to War College, General, we spent some time in New York City at JP Morgan Chase. And when you listen to the senior leaders at JP Morgan Chase talk about cyber securing the banking infrastructure, it rhymes a lot with the things that we need to do in the Air Force. And so we're really eager to look and find ways that we can take advantage of these digital capabilities to do things better and smarter, and to protect our weapon system and really take the full advantage. I really like what Greg's talking about in the manufacturing arena. I really believe that we're getting closer and closer to realize the potential of really pulling the entire product development cycle and the systems engineering cycle, pulling that thread through. So these are things that come to mind when we talk about opportunities for industry and the way ahead.
Wrap up. Both of you have just the finest engineers maybe in the world working for you. Engineers, program managers with unbelievable educational backgrounds. Here at the Air Force Association and across our 200 chapters, we constantly talk about airmen for life, officer, enlisted, and civilian. And many of those airmen for life, in fact, are in industry. So just a few minutes, if you wouldn't mind, Greg, the opportunity to brag about your Northrop Grumman workforce, but that represents really you represent our entire defense industry workforce. And then, Jason, you wind up whatever you want to talk about, but certainly your exemplary workforce and leaders also. So, Greg, a few minutes, and then Greg, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, no, I thank you, sir. It's as you referenced, we are not only a very diverse workforce from maybe the way we look, the way we think, but we're also a very diverse workforce from where our workforce has come from all parts of industry and outside of industry, and for what it's worth, to your point, we have an awful lot of retired Air Force folks working for us, specifically on the system. What we find is these operators, these maintainers, these defenders, when they get out of the Air Force, they don't want to stop not working on ICBMs. So as a result, they seek out us or one of our industry partners to work for. So we have it's a fabulous workforce that is very focused every single day on making sure that we're doing everything we can to further this program and all of our work that we do on the current ground subsystem sustainment program for Minuteman III, that we just do what we can every day to make the warfighter's life easier, to be able to make sure that the system stays in a mission readiness position that it needs to and is expected to, and that we're delivering a GBSD weapon system on cost, on schedule, that meets the warfighter's needs, and specifically to meet as Jason talked about, we have really 3 focus areas: launch in 23, meet the IOC minimum requirements in 29, and get the full fleet replaced by 2036.
Well, thanks again, Greg, and Jason. If you could please wrap us up. But again, I can't thank both of you enough.
Yeah, well, sir, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, this is probably one of the most exciting projects you could imagine, and an incredible opportunity space for these airmen to just amaze me every day. And I think one of the benefits of actually having so many senior leaders come and visit us out here is really that the PowerPoint charts just don't do justice to see just the innovations that these airmen are doing, both in the Northrop Grumman side of the fence and also particularly with my team here. I think we're outpacing a lot of what is in the textbooks and in the academic curriculum for how you do these mega projects. I think what you'd see, General Wright, and you'd be so proud of just sort of the thinking that's gone into this. We're seeing in the digital environment, brand new engineers that are coming out of school with master's degrees and bachelor's degrees, just dazzling 30 and 40 year veterans in their knowledge. And, we're seeing knowledge transfer happening in the digital environment in ways that I couldn't have predicted. And so, sir, I could not be prouder of this enterprise in what it is and what it's becoming. And it really, I can't say enough about the leadership, starting really all the way with the chief through the SAF-AQ and Global Strike Command. STRATCOM has been spectacular. The sort of support we've gotten on the Hill and OSD, truly historic. And I'll tell you, those leaders have been moving mountains for this program. The attention the chief and the vice chief have put on GBSD is incredible. And I just can't say enough about it, sir. So really, it's not just these airmen down and in, but it's these airmen up and out that is making GBSD the successful program it's been. And the kind of resolve and what we're going to need from these leaders going forward is going to be every bit as important as it's been to date. So those are really, I'd love to have you out here, General Wright, so you can see it, and the other AFA partners. Love to show you what Greg's got brewing up here. Just a couple of short skips and jumps ahead north of me. But it's been great to speak to everyone here today, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thanks so much, Jason and Greg. You remind me when you're talking that maybe the fact that General Bunch was a Golden Glove boxing champion, that culture is pervading across AFMC. So You certainly reinforced that. Thank you so much, Jason and Greg both. Well, great discussion. And coming up next, we're going to dig into the challenge of sustaining aging systems. But first, a message from the Utah Defense Alliance's CEO. Please.
Hello, my name is Tage Flint. I am the president of the Utah Defense Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you all to Utah. I'm saddened that I can't be there in person because of out-of-town commitments, but wanted to convey our welcome to you and tell you a little bit about the Utah Defense Alliance. As I mentioned, I'm the president, and we have a board of directors who are community volunteers doing excellent work in behalf of our military missions here in Utah. I can tell you that these folks are dedicated to the cause and do it on their own time and generously give their time and efforts to this cause. The Utah Defense Alliance is advocating in behalf of all the military installations and missions in Utah, whether it's Air Force, National Guard, Army, or otherwise. We are there in their support and work largely in Washington, D.C., and with our state and local politicians as well to advocate for their needs. I hope that you find it good here in Utah for you, and that you'll find that we are very much in support of what you do. I was reading an Air Force publication the other day and found this quote, and I think it's pertinent to what our topic is today, and that is a quote from General John Hyden, Vice Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said this: "Without the backstop of a nuclear triad, it basically is impossible to deter the adversary." And I think we here at Utah Defense Alliance adhere to that very much so. And we find that the Minuteman III and the GBSD are fundamental to the safe and secure and effective deterrent for our nation. And there is no substitute for that. We spend a lot of time explaining that to our citizenry as well as our political leaders, that we think that there is no substitute to that leg of the triad, and certainly advocate for its continuance. We understand that we use them every day. Even though we are not firing anything, we know that the fact that they're there, and we know that the fact that our adversaries know they're there, means a lot in terms of national security. Our adversaries are getting more advanced. We understand that as well, and we get briefings on that from time to time. And we'll tell you that we understand the importance of having a modernized Icbm program. Of course, this is the leg of the triad we're talking about at this conference, and we know here at Hill Air Force Base we will have a large play in how that goes into the future with our contractors and with our Air Force partners. We hope for the best, hope that for full funding. We hope for full implementation of the GBSD going forward. We thank the AFA for focusing on this very important topic. We think it's critical here to advance these ideas and so that Congress and others understand the importance. We also thank our men and women that work on these Icbm programs each and every day, whether it be in sustainment of the Minuteman III or in the development of the GBSD. We know that they're incredible heroes to our nation and understand the important role that they take, whether that's here at Hill Air Force Base or elsewhere in the nation. Again, welcome to Utah. Very much hope you enjoy your visit, and I hope to see you next time you're in town. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Husey. I'm Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Over the course of today, we've largely focused on modernization, the future systems that will replace the current Minuteman III missile. We rely today to deter potential adversaries around the world. And while we wait for those systems to be ready, we have to sustain the nuclear force we have today. The older systems get, the harder it is to keep them ready at all times. Parts in the supply chain are a struggle, so is finding the talent to work on these legacy technologies. So let's get into the business of logistics, workforce, contracting, and programs, and talk about what it takes to sustain a capable and credible Icbm fleet in its twilight years. Joining me are Daryl Grady, the I2SC Program Manager, Ted Kersey, Program Director of Strategic Deterrence Systems, and Missile and Weapon Systems Defense, Space, and Security at the Boeing Company, and Randy Timofichik, who is Director of Sales and Business Development and an advisor to Mantech. Thank you all for joining me today. And let's look at past sustainment. Once cost-effective, such as the GRP and PRP, is now getting very expensive, particularly with respect to the robustness of the supply chain. In general sustainment, let's begin with a 2-minute opener from each of you on the challenge that we're facing to sustain the people, processes, and technology needed to keep Minuteman III credible. Let's start with Daryl, and then we'll go to our friend from Boeing, and then from Randy. Go ahead, Daryl.
Thanks, Peter. Well, you know, what's interesting, before I assumed the position of president of the Integrated Icbm Support Services Company, I was a member of the senior leadership that managed and operated Y-12 and Pantex, delivering the LEPs for the overall Triad, or as General Temple called it, the weapons system. I bring that up because it's identically close to the situation we're here to talk about today, sustainment and complementing modernization. So when you talk about people, one of the things we found out there, and I know we're going to see and are seeing as it relates to the overall CBM, is the definition of the workforce. And that definition's changed over time. Today, it clearly is the current workforce, but it's also the STEM individuals that are in elementary and high school that have an opportunity to be a part of this mission. It is the university graduates that we're working to bring in as interns and then hire into the mission. And it's the retirees who can bring knowledge transfer into the system to help the overall workforce be better than it was. From a process standpoint, one of the biggest opportunities is continuous process improvement from the bottom up versus the top down directed. I think that's going to be a great opportunity as we look at Minuteman III and sustainment and providing that knowledge transfer to the GBSD ICBM. The third item is technology. While we have to move to model-based systems engineering, clearly I think we all recognize that it has to be done in a balanced transition and an integrated management approach to be successful. So combine those three together is an experience I've had that allowed us to be successful in meeting the mission that we owed NNSA and the overall military as far as our Triad. And I think it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate those same opportunities here on the ICBM directorates. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Now we'd like to turn it over to our colleague from Boeing.
Yeah, first off, thanks, Peter and the AFA for having me today. It's very important to talk about this subject and sustaining Minuteman into the future. I agree with Daryl. It's all about people. The key for us has been people and has always been and having the right people. If you don't have the right talent, you can't deliver on the other two, processes and technologies. So there are really two challenges in that effort. Is one, the overall available talent pool and attracting and retaining that talent. The talent pool being a bit competitive here in the northern Utah area. It's difficult now, but we're doing well in attracting and retaining those folks. We're also looking at the different flexible work arrangements that we found out work in the last year and a half, attracting the right talent to the workforce. We're also, of course, working with local and out-of-state universities as well as the STEM projects to grow the eventual talent pool that will come to this industry. Really, new technology comes and goes. So we're working on an old technology, but really what kind of remains constant in the workforce is your culture. And drawing a clear line with those for those employees to the overall mission. And I think that is key in retaining and attracting talent to your workforce. It's really connecting team to that mission and then giving them opportunities to thrive and grow in their careers. I think we offer that for 100 employees across the Minuteman weapon system. It's a great weapon system to work on. Again, having the right people. Once you have the right people, is having the right knowledge transfer programs in place in order to transfer that knowledge from the experienced employees to the new employees coming into the Minuteman weapon system, and then keeping it fresh, right? So we have several modernization programs that we're working on Minuteman, namely the Icbm Crypto Upgrade Program Phase 2 and the Flight Test and Telemetry Program, or FT3. Those are really bringing new technologies into the Minuteman mission, and it has helped in retaining the talent and giving exciting programs to work on.
Okay, again, let me reiterate, from Ted's acknowledgement, I'd like to thank Peter and the Air Force Association for really hosting this. I think this is a key discussion point as a career logistician. I'm excited to see, kind of sustainment at the forefront of the discussion piece, because there are a lot of challenges we have to deal with out there. I mean, certainly from a Caterpillar perspective, we deal with that every day. Again, looking at people, processes, and in the technology component of this, we're all facing, many of the similar challenges as we kind of walk through this. But I would say that, from a people perspective, not to go over the same ground again, but knowledge management, knowledge transfer, again, I think as we've went through the last 14 months, I think we've discovered how to open the aperture a little bit, trying to leverage on different components of technology. And I truly believe that experience is going to help us go forward, particularly when we get into some of the challenges of competing locally. You hear this constantly in terms of the Utah dynamic, whether it was discussed previously out of Colonel Bartolome in the previous session. But again, it's trying to maintain those challenges to attract the right kind of workforce back into to ICBMs. And certainly GBSD has, for the most part, had a lot of success in that arena. The challenge areas are really going to be working on the older technology, like Minuteman III. I would say from a process perspective, we've made a lot of significant progress, I think, from managing through some of our supply chain processes, having went through some of the challenge lessons we learned after 2008, how we established some of the nuclear weapons related material process. I think has helped us a lot from a supply chain perspective. And then, finally, I'd kind of like to emphasize too, what we've done in digital engineering and putting sustainment at the forefront of that discussion point, I think is critical in terms of moving forward, not only for GBSD, but also for Minuteman III, leveraging on, some of those key technology concepts out there to really kind of help us protect our systems, design our systems. It is just really interesting in terms of some of the things that Northrop and the government are doing right now in the digital engineering space, and that's pretty exciting. And I'm glad they're putting sustaining engineering and sustainment at the forefront of that discussion point.
Thank you very much, Randy. Let's go to our second question, and that is some of the challenges we're facing. I'd like to start again with Daryl. What are the primary programmatic challenges to sustaining the ICBM enterprise that we're now facing?
Well, clearly, front and foremost is sustained and consistent funding. That's been a challenge. We've discussed that across many of the other discussions earlier this morning. And that has to be maintained to be able to keep the trajectory of not just the sustainment, but the modernization activity going on as well. The second thing is, while the supplier chain has been improved, as Randy spoke to earlier, I think all of us recognize it's got to be expanded. To be able to meet up and stay with the demands that are going to be a part of the going forward requirements of sustainment, and the DMIL activities will be associated with that, but the significant modernization activities with GBSD and the opportunity to perhaps leverage like vendors across both directorates would be ideal. A third item is, quite frankly, focus, and that's by the respective vendors and OEMs and SEI vendors that are participating. In other words, we all have specific roles to play. And the more we can stay in that swim lane and do that job with excellence and in a collaborative fashion, the more successful the overall mission will be. And it allows us to avoid conflicts of interest. So I think that's a significant opportunity, challenges, but opportunities.
Thank you. And let's turn it over to Mr. Kersey.
I agree with Daryl on his first point, and General Ray said it this morning, and I'll quote him. He said, we need to give the airmen a fighting chance. Right, so on Minuteman, it's all about, and it will be about funding and attention to the Minuteman weapon system. And overcoming those obsolescence challenges and risks, that the unknown unknowns, right? So we're going to have things that happen that still need to be fixed in Minuteman to sustain it for the next 20 years before GBSD comes online. So we really need to keep that focus on both sustainment O&M dollars as well as any additional modification programs that will eliminate those risks.
Randy, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Peter. I think as we go down the funding trail, and certainly, those are unique dynamics that you have to deal with within the Beltway. But, the Triad itself and nuclear modernization needs to continue to be a key press. My concerns become what will be available for sustainment dollars, priority shift. I think we see some of that, from an Army perspective right now, where the emphasis has been on, what are you going to do for research and development? And again, does sustainment take a kind of a backseat out of that? And again, how can we more effectively maintain the enterprises as we try to sustain, particularly in the realm of the Minuteman III program? We went through some experiences in mid 2000 timeframe, I think, as we kind of worked through, driving, the propulsion replacement program, where we're driving the propulsion system rocket engine program. And again, Mark 21, life extension out there. And I think, we met some interesting challenges. How are we going to maintain our core and common workload out there for statutory authority? How do we do that partnering that's going to be more cost effective? I think from both the industry perspective and the government requirements that sit out there, it's going to be certainly an interesting time. But I think we have the benefit, I think, of some historical lessons learned out there that I think will really be helpful to us as we kind of move forward with sustainment activities in the future.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to another topic having to do with infrastructure, and I'll go through the question is, what are the most serious logistical challenges to sustaining an aging infrastructure? And again, let's start with Daryl and then go through our two other guests.
Well, the first major challenge, quite frankly, is integrating three activities going on in the same physical space and with many of the same resources. And that is, you have a mission which is active and you have to be performing. You have recapitalization, modernization activities going on, and you have preventive maintenance or predictive maintenance going on. That has to be integrated to be able to die correctly with no impact to the mission and 24/7 alert posture that this mission has to be in at all times. And there's a way that can be done. In fact, if I look back at my most recent experience with the explosives system, where we had to increase the amount of LEP production to the Triad, while we were doing 30% year-over-year recapitalization increase and 35% predictability maintenance and lower the cost at the same time. That can be done if you put the systems in place and you put the training in place. Because culturally, people have, in many cases, not only following the procedure and process, but they have a little bit of tribal knowledge that you follow. So we have to go through, I think, a process of educating our workforce on how to work in an integrated fashion to get effectiveness, but maintain at all times the safety, security, and quality position they have to have. And last but not least, bringing that supplier base in where they can be a focus and a force multiplier for us in some cases is another attribute that I think we'll want to continue to look at and expand upon.
Mr. Kersey.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines as my last response. I mean, there's I think General Genentip was the one that said it. There's unknown unknowns out there, right? There's risks to the Minuteman weapon system and getting it to the late 2030s. There's things out there that we aren't aware of, and we need to look forward and ensure that we have an approach to respond to those risks. And that's all about making sure there's a robust supply chain, looking in advance to see if there's ways to reduce obsolescence risk in a systematic approach, and ensuring that Minuteman stays viable through the late 2030. So we got to take a proactive approach, looking at issues that are out in front of us. We got to look at the data through Colonel Quigley and General John Tempo's digital sustainment thrust to make sure that we're doing the right trend analysis, make sure that we've got those approaches in place.
Thank you. And now over to you, Randy.
Yeah, and again, I think some of the key challenges and issues we're going to face, as we've learned historically out there, is accommodating large scale modernization program. This one will be unique from the perspective that we're going to be trying to field maintain and field two weapon systems at the same time. So again, as you look at some of the key elements that we went through the first time around with programs like PRP and PISRI is really kind of how do we manage and navigate that storage aspect out there from a weapons perspective? How do we manage the storage aspect of it from an explosive perspective, and then how are we going to manage through some of the unique dynamics of transportation requirements? Again, we're going to put different demands and different requirements, I think, from a fielding perspective out there, and not only from the transportation from whatever the locations are for GBSD, but how are you going to manage this with the legacy systems out there on the payload transporters? And I know the government's looking at that pretty closely. You've got some considerations on roads and bridges. Again, those factors have come in as Northrop and the government have looked at the GBSD requirements. And I think, when we get into managing critical aspects of trying to maintain the original sites out there, how do we effectively overlay, a key program, depot maintenance schedule out there, and how do we integrate that with corresponding deployment for what the OEM is going to do in terms of laying that out. And again, it's trying to synchronize those schedules, because an interruption in one is going to have an impact on all of our schedules out there, whether it be our day-to-day maintenance schedule for Minuteman 3 or the deployment schedule for GBSD. So I think there has to be key synchronization for those efforts and effects out there.
Thank you very much. A very related question is my next area, that the security but surety of the contractor base in the supply chain are a major concern. And what I'd like to do is have Daryl address this to begin with. Do we have the supply chain we need for strategic missiles for the 21st century? Is it going to be secure enough, and is the surety going to be there?
Well, the answer is yes, but. And the but side of it is the suppliers and vendors can only be as successful as we give them the forecast and the predictability of where the components and systems are that are going to be needed replaced in the sustainment arena. That can be done by the model-based systems engineering acceleration into the sustainment portfolio, and the predictability with AI and ML in our maintenance activities to allow us to get ahead of the requirements and provide those to the vendors. The second thing is requirements. They've got to be complete, they've got to be accurate, and they've got to be timely around the functional operations that are expected to be performed. That's not always the case. In fact, you heard earlier today, General Ray talk about some of the drawings that don't even exist any longer for the MM3. We've got to work through that. And last but not least, I would suggest we consider forming a partners in excellence approach with our suppliers, much like we would do a partners in excellence with our Air Force. That allows us to talk in an open forum. What are the things we're seeing that are challenging them being responsive to our needs, and what are the things they're seeing that are being impediments to them accomplishing that? I think that's in front of us.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Kersey.
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is most definitely. I think we do have the supply chain in place, and the key to that is to ensure that you're looking forward. As I said earlier, the risks within the weapon system, as well as any obsolescence issues. So I'll give you a real life example. In the NS-50 guidance system, for Minuteman III. Over the last 20, 30 years, we've been using quote unquote digital sustainment, as Colonel Quigley and General G talks about, to make sure that we are foreseeing those issues or obsolescence issues, right? So, and in the guidance system and the program depot maintenance, we're seeing the highest reliability ever of that system, and the system has parts that are older than I am. So it works if we've got the foresight and the planning in place to ensure that we've got the risks and obsolescence issues covered.
Thank you. Over to you, Randy.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm kind of optimistic in terms of, you know, what we've done from, you know, that latter part of the 2008 timeframe. But I think we've made some significant progress in effectively managing supply chain, particularly from a nuclear weapons related material perspective. Supply chain risk management, again, is going to be a key focus for a lot of companies across the entire spectrum. I know the things that we look at from Caterpillar in terms of what goes on there from supply chain. But I think that the good thing is it's helped driven more process discipline. It's helped us drive more viability for sourcing out there. Again, you know, we have executive orders that have come out that have talked about Buy America Act requirements, trade agreement requirements, and these aren't new. You know, we've had to deal with these before, but I think we're going to have to drive a lot more rigor over the next several years to make sure that, you know, we maintain, you know, those key requirements. And again, securing second source requirements out there, those will be critical to make sure that we have the right content going forward. It's going to be a challenging time over the next several years, and it's good to see that we're dealing with a lot of that up front right now. So,
thank you, Randy. Our next subject area is going to be the workforce. Now, as we modernize and sustain the infrastructure, what are the key challenges for modernizing and sustaining a talented workforce? But that includes not only throughout the remainder of the Minuteman III deployment, but that of the new GBSD. So, Daryl, over to you. That's a tough one.
Well, it is, but let's kind of break it down a little bit. In my opening comments, I talked about a redefining of the workforce and what that's made up of. I want to add to that, maybe the next generation workforce has to be trained better and differently. And let me talk to how we might do that. You heard General Jen Temple talk earlier today, where he was in discussions and meetings with children and students in STEM programs who had no idea about this mission. I believe there's an opportunity to incorporate that group into a life cycle of training for future employees, to leverage the STEM as an opportunity for them to grow, because it's clearly one of the most critical attributes this country needs right now. But also share with them the opportunity to be involved in a mission that's in their backyard they may have not known about. And more importantly, it's one of the key reasons why they have the freedom that we have in this nation. The second thing is work in a more robust framework with the universities to develop interns and next generation graduates coming out of the universities in line with the forecast need across the entire directorate complex. For the incumbents, or those that are working there today, develop a training program that allows them to gather new training relevant to moving forward and how we're going to maintain and sustain, and also how they could get graduate degrees to grow in their career. And last but not least, retirees. I mentioned that in the beginning. They have knowledge transfer that is eminently important to us in leadership development, in mission criticality, operations, technology. Let's give those men and women, those servicemen and women, an opportunity to be a participant in training those next generation workforce individuals. The second thing you have to do is inform some kind of a structure where that process actually works. We believe that could be done by standing up an Icbm university. That is a collaboration with some of the attributes I just talked about. And last but not least, I'll be honest with you, in many years I've been in this business, traditionally when we were hiring people, we did it ourselves, which I had the pleasure of working many years with Lockheed Martin, and now I'm a part of the Leidos Corporation, and now I'm running my own company. And what I have found, those are good people with good processes, but they have a lot of things on their plate. How about bringing on a company that's focused, is a national known entity on how you recruit, how you staff, how you qualify to bring people in to that training and educational process to make them mission ready on day one. I think that's the opportunity for all of us to consider as we move forward, to make sustainment affordable and bringing more mission on the dollars that are being expended.
Well, over to you, Mr. Kersey, in particular, from the perspective of a company like Boeing, how do you see that challenge?
Yeah, so we're definitely involved in STEM, working with local universities, things like Daryl had mentioned. We've got programs where we bring brand new or high school students, college students in during the summer. Of course, we hook them up with folks that know Minuteman and how to sustain Minuteman. So key to retaining and sustaining that talented workforce is really knowledge transfer. I really believe in that. So we've got within Boeing, we've got young employees or interns really working side by side with the I'll call them graybeards, people that are experts in how we did things 30 years ago. So even if you're developing a new weapon system, or you're sustaining an old weapon system, there are lessons learned or approaches that we've had that we've leveraged, along the way that are 20 to 30 years old. There's no substitute for decades of experience, technical expertise, and proven results. So it is really key to get those experienced employees sitting with the younger employees that are coming through the system, so we can transfer that knowledge and we're not learning the mistakes of the past. General Ray that talked about something earlier about a careful blend of sustainment and developmental engineering. So that's what we have within Minuteman currently, and definitely within the Boeing sustainment programs. So we've got a level of sustainment for Minuteman, but on top of that, we've got some developmental engineering. And I talked about two of several programs we've got, ICU2 or the crypto upgrade program, and FT3, which is replacing the functionality for flight tests. So those provide engineers an opportunity to do, maybe they're more excited in the development aspect of the life cycle than the sustainment aspect. So that gives them a chance to move between programs and learn different techniques, expand their knowledge and skills, and grow them as an employee.
Thank you very much. Randy, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Peter. Again, as we had mentioned earlier, and I think it was a comment that Ted had made about, what the last 14 months have really taught us out there. But, the GBSD attraction, I think, has been good for the Valley. But again, we understand that there is a competitive market out there. The Silicon Slopes certainly has driven a lot of demand requirements on the resource challenges. So how do we bring, those key components to help us support, efforts like digital engineering? And I think really you're going to have to open the aperture. You're going to have to think a little bit differently, I think, from a challenge perspective, to make sure that you can meet, those things. And it's going to challenge the conventional wisdom in terms of, how both government and industry have tried to deal with that. I think you're attracting new market entrants out there. Mantrek has been one of those that has tried to leverage and bring in different components and expertise out there. So, we need to make sure that we're staying open-minded. We bring that resource challenge, and as all of us have mentioned before, knowledge management and knowledge transfer will be critical for us. I mean, we have a lot of gray beards out there that will be key to leverage on their resource expertise. It is certainly, from a Minuteman 3 perspective, critical for what we're doing as we move into the future. And we need to make sure that we capture that critical knowledge and information out there that will be relative to supporting Minuteman 3 and eventually GBSD as we move forward.
Subject is the question of digital engineering. As you know, the legacy Minuteman force is an analog world, and digitized is the future. Could you, starting with Daryl, could you help explain how digital engineering and modeling will change the outlook for future multiple decade sustainment, particularly given the fact that this next round of modernization is going to last for half a century?
Yeah. Good question. Let me start off with 5 attributes that every mission is focused on: cost, schedule, quality, safety, security. What does that have in common with model-based systems engineering and a digital engineering environment? It allows us to move into a virtual environment prior to moving into the legacy or traditional physical environment to do simulations, to do predictability, consequently driving improvements in all 5 of those attributes. That is critical for us to recognize the opportunity of using that, as we recognize the administration, Congress, and the Air Force are constantly going to be up against headwinds on affordability. It's our opportunity to use this model-based systems engineering, as they're already doing GBSD, and they're expanding into Minuteman III, to take that even further with our workforce. That's the opportunity in front of us, and that's the opportunity we have to take a hold of.
Thank you, Daryl. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Kersey from Boeing.
Yeah, there's some folks out there that say, hey, this is an old weapon system. Why would you do MBSE? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, that's how the current workforce thinks, and that's how the young folks are coming into the business, is they're thinking about those things, and that's the way they think, that's the way they work. So we have to, as old folks, have to adapt to that, right? So the people that have been doing this for years, and basically, we're all in on digital engineering. So we're already doing aspects of that in our guided sustainment activities, where we're modeling the NS50 guidance system, and that's shown some benefits. We've already implemented digital engineering on our, as I mentioned earlier, the FT3 program and our ICU2 program, and those are allowing the young folks and the more experienced folks come together in a common language and understanding the system. One of the things I'm really excited about is, and I'll coin it digital sustainment. I think this is what General Tempo and Colonel Quigley were getting at earlier. When I came into the ICBM business in the 2008 timeframe, it was really surprising to be on how much data was not available from the weapon system. And the key to doing digital sustainment for Minuteman III is getting that data into one repository that can be used to look at future problems. So that digital engineering or that digital sustainment will help us maintain Minuteman III into the future. So excited at that thrust, and we're all in on this.
Sir, Randy.
Thanks, Peter. Just kind of, highlighting what Ted had mentioned here, the data element, I think is going to be critical, as you look at having the capacity and capability to do condition-based maintenance. We track 1 million machines worldwide. Again, that data element that is critical for us to drive those data decisions is crucial, I think, in terms of what we do. I think, with digital engineering, you got to remember there are 3 aspects of digital engineering. There's as designed, as built, and then of course as maintained out there. And it will be very important for us to kind of leverage on the key components of what we're doing for GBSD, any backwards compatibility that we can leverage on Minuteman III. But again, as we go forward, not only in Minuteman III, it's going to be very important to do that and leverage on those digital engineering efforts, from GBSD into Minuteman III to help us, manage and sustain as we go forward in the future. And again, we're leveraging on, on that whole component. Sustainment is generally only thought of in terms of, the day-to-day environment. I think sustainment needs to be a critical part of, the decision process when we acquire systems out there. It's got to be in the forefront.
We come to another subject, and that is cybersecurity. And one of the questions comes up is, how does the high-threat cyber environment affect the sustainment challenge to the NC3 requirements for Minuteman III? Daryl, let's start with you on that.
Well, we're all aware of the cyber breaches that have occurred, and we actually talked about earlier today in one of the other sessions in our meat packing processing facilities in the Colonial Pipeline. Who would have ever thought, right? Well, that cybersecurity risk is even more dynamic, more real as it relates to the NC3 area and this mission as a whole, whether it be the NC3 part of the mission, the delivery vehicle, and or the explosives. And we're moving to model-based systems engineering with authoritative sources, and they're going to be at risk if we don't have a strong, rigorous cyber approach and technologies wrapped around that. So it kind of brings us back to three things that intersect as they did at the beginning. The first item is people. People want to do the right thing when it relates to cyber, but they've got to be trained. They've got to be trained through processes that show them how to improve on how that cyber is going to be sustained. And they've got to be given enabling technology that helps them to do that in a better fashion. So I think when we bring what we started this dialogue off with to bear on the cyber side, that being people, process, and technologies, we'll accomplish a critical item that has to wrap around everything we're doing, inclusive, by the way, with our supply chain that we need to add and we will be adding on an ongoing basis.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Kersey from Boeing.
Yeah, I think it's out there. It's a big threat and it's getting worse. So we got to deal with it. And the way the Air Force and Boeing are dealing with it, several modification programs have that cybersecurity layer requirements on it. So it definitely does add additional complexity to the program, but it's definitely something that's needed in order to lower the threat vectors into the weapon system. I'm confident that industry can do this in Minuteman III sustainment. We're partners with the Air Force to make sure that the cyber threat doesn't actually become real within Minuteman. Looking forward to working with the Air Force in the future on cyber.
Thank you very much. Randy, over to you, sir.
Yeah, Peter, it just, the one encouraging aspect of, our weapon system was, it was predicated on nuclear surety. We had these challenges early within the development of the weapon system. We addressed them. We've come up with a pretty robust process. So, when I think of cybersecurity, I think of nuclear surety. Again, that's the fundamental component of, how we provided those protections against vulnerabilities for the weapon system. Granted, there are going to be new dynamics that we're going to have to deal with, in the NC3 world. We will continue to focus, that effort to make sure that we keep the system vulnerabilities protected. And, we'll always have that requirement out there. I just think that, with the talent pool that we have from our, our engineers, our design, our acquisition professionals, our operators, and our maintainers out there, they're going to continue to do, the right things to help us design and support a system that keeps it cyber hardened. This will be very critical for us in the future.
Come towards the end of our session, but I wanted to give each of our speakers a chance to give a 30-second roundup of their summary before I introduce our next speaker. Go ahead, Daryl.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for being our moderator today, and I want to thank AFA giving us the chance as a team to talk about something that's so incredibly important to this nation. And I want to build off something that General Jenna Temple also said. This is an opportunity we have to consistently build on, ensuring more of the public knows the value of this mission in their lives and are pushing for the sustainment of this and the modernization. That's a big role that they can play for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kersey from Boeing.
Yeah, so we've been with this weapon system since the beginning of the weapon system, and we'll be there till the end. We are privileged to work with the Air Force in this mission. Again, connecting individuals and employees to the mission is very important, as well as the attention this weapon system will get in the future as GBSD transitions in. Again, the funding will be critical in ensuring that the mission stays viable.
Thank you, sir. And now, Randy.
Unmute.
Thank you. Again, I wanted to say thanks to Peter and AFA. Many thanks to Peter for what he's done over the many decades here. But I think, the thought I would leave you with is remember our history. Our history will help us prepare for the future requirements out there. They will help us hopefully eliminate some risk and alleviate the potential for making some errors as we move forward.
Thank you all for participating today. But let me begin now and introduce our next speaker, who will give us a look at the overall ICBM enterprise. Colonel Eric Quigley is the director of the Minuteman III Systems Directorate at the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center. And in this capacity, he serves as the director, Minuteman III Systems Directorate, Hill Air Force Base, Utah. And as the senior material leader, he's responsible for more than $22.5 billion in acquisition and sustainment efforts to ensure that there are 400 combat-capable nuclear Minuteman III missiles, that they're safe, secure, and effective. The Directorate has more than 900 military, civilian, and support contractors. And Colonel Quigley, welcome to this, our AFA event, and it's over to you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. I think it's an honor to be part of this forum, and apologies I could not be on that last panel. I really had wanted to, but was not able to do so. So yes, just like Colonel Bartolome and myself, he runs GBSD, I run the Minuteman III program office. I'm going to walk you through a couple of charts. Basically, these are the publicly releasable charts that we share with any distinguished visitor that comes through Hill Air Force Base to visit our ICBM efforts. And I'm gonna go over some talking points here as I go through the charts that I've heard throughout the day from some of our senior leaders and our distinguished industry panels, and hit on a couple things. What we're doing with Minuteman III, with digital and other things as we sustain this. I think I heard in the last session a weapon system that's in its twilight phase. So if we can go to the next chart. When we have new congressmen and whatnot come through, we like to put this chart up just to show that not just ICBMs, but nuclear weapons in general. This is a chart that shows by statistics that nuclear deterrence actually is working. Since the advent of nuclear weapons, you can see the per capita, for the percentage of the world population during wartime, how many fatalities we've seen throughout history. And with the advent of the nuclear age in the 1950s, that loss of life has drastically decreased. Let's go to the next one. You heard Colonel Bartolome mention to you in his comments that these ICBM missile wings, which you see the 3 red circles there in the middle of the United States, up at Malmstrom, Minot, and F.E. Warren. These land areas are literally the size of mid-Atlantic states. More importantly, though, than their actual size, I just wanted to remind folks, as we're talking about ICBMs and the land-based leg of the Triad, it is, as we heard, the most responsive leg of the Triad. And it's actually an ecosystem. It's not just the missiles, the AVEs, aerospace vehicle equipment, but it's the NC3, NC2 network, the support equipment, the ground equipment, which you heard General Genetempo talk about. It's an entire ecosystem that, as GBSD comes online, this is not a trivial task, as Colonel Bartolome mentioned. I know it's a simple analogy, but as we convert launch facilities and MAFs, missile alert facilities, 1 per week for 9 years straight, that is a gargantuan task, and it's like giving your dog a bath at the same time you're walking them. So it's a huge undertaking, and we're up for that task with our industry partners and this awesome team we have in the nuclear enterprise. The other point on this chart we like to make is the reason we're the most responsive leg of the Triad is surely because of the number of aim points. If an adversary were to attack, you could see if all we had were the SSBNs and the bombers, we're missing 400, 450 plus aim points that the adversary could attack. And then our ability to respond to that after a first strike. So the aim point advantage is huge. Next chart, please. So this is just a rehash of the 58-year-old weapon system. We like to focus on the missile itself on the top. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is really the theme of how difficult it is to maintain and sustain this weapon system. The missile itself is 51 years old, and then down on the bottom, the launch facility on your left and the launch control center, the MAF on the right, with the capsule and all the infrastructure and equipment is 58 years old. So when General Genetempo said he's worried about HVAC, he's not joking. So just a quick story on the lower left, you could see that equipment building, or the launch support building, excuse me, next to the launch facility. In there, there's, for example, the diesel electric unit, and then your brine chiller lines, right, which cools the LF. So those lines that go through the support building into the launch facility, those are severely corroded at all 400 plus sites. But guess what? We don't attack that problem when we go do program depot maintenance out in the field. We just wait for them to break. And when those break, a missile site goes off alert, which is a huge problem. So where we're going in the future with PDM is away from this, hey, let's hit a site every 8 years, and let's go more to a condition-based or predictive-based model using data analytics and digital sustainment to actually help inform us on what maintenance actions we can take at these sites that'll help us get better mission availability, mission capability, or nuclear capability. So what we've done recently with this weapon system, not just the missile, but the ground sites, the ground equipment as well, including the capsule, is we've actually identified the top drivers of maintenance and supply actions, which we can then go back to our supply chain partners and industry and say, we really need to double down on these efforts for mitigation activities to sustain this system for 18 more years. So things like the environmental control systems with filters, the shock isolator air compressors that are both in the LFs and the LCCs, the blast doors, the B-plug, the motor generators, which are causing MICAPs in the field, blast valves, things like that. We know exactly how many, based on maintenance data that we're trending, we know how many non-mission capable and partial mission capable hours that these problems are causing us. I'm having a discussion next week with OSD policy, and I have a couple of pictures. I wish I could have included those in here, but they weren't publicly releasable yet, of how much corrosion we have on things like launch facility, launch enclosure doors, and the actual blast doors to the capsules and to the B-plug. These are, you heard General Genetempo talk about blast doors and how it prevents us from them being able to lock lock appropriately. And you can only scrape away the rust and take away so many layers so many times before you're putting the crews at risk for potential hardness concerns, right? And to survive an EMP blast or radiation. Okay, so that's kind of how, just a refresher on the entire system. The one thing on this chart that's not shown is our support equipment, like our payload transporters and our transporter erectors. But that's all part of our maintainability and sustainability challenge in the future. Next. Okay, this is just a reminder. 450 operational silos. We usually 50 of those are per the New START treaty are not in operation, but we're always doing some type of depot maintenance on 50 of those sites. The critical attributes of the system is that it's responsible, survivable, reliable, lethal, and secure. Although you've heard even from General Ray today that SLEPing this aged weapon system will not get after STRATCOM and Global Strike capabilities and requirements for the future, as we now have we're now looking at a capable dual threat with both China and Russia. Our KPPs there: accuracy, reliability, availability, and hardness. We have a robust program in our program office where we go after these areas. You heard about General Ray and others talk about our operational test launches. We do 3 to 4 a year to test for accuracy, reliability. We also do hardness testing in the field, actually hook up EMP and other things to machines to do that measurement of different launch facilities and NAFs to look at our hardness. And then we also, oh, sorry, I just lost my lighting. There we go. Excuse me. Then we also look at availability through our predictive maintenance and data trends for maintenance. Okay, next chart, please. This is the one I'm probably going to spend most of the rest of the time on. There's a lot on this chart, and I'm going to just pull on a couple threads real quick. So, again, a weapon system, this chart is out of date. It's 58 years old if you include the ground systems like I talked about. It's over 40 years beyond its design life. We heard that a couple of times today. Though it's still effective, we do face several challenges to sustain this weapon system. Age out and attrition is the big one. You heard Colonel Bartolome talk about IOC from General Wright asked that question about when is IOC, FOC, 2029. So later this decade, as GBSD capability comes up, Minuteman III just so happens the end of this decade, we start our predictive analysis is showing that some of the key components and key subsystems on the weapon system really start falling below that 400 missiles per year requirement due to age out and attrition. Namely, the booster on the propulsion side, we're predicting in 2031, that's going to fall below the line for 400 missiles unless we bring GBSD up the curve. Then we have similar predictions on our guidance and on our rocket engines, our propulsion subsystems, or PISREs. On the ground side, we are gathering data now with our support with our industry partners, doing aging surveillance and things like that to get specific predictions on when some of these subsystems are going to age out and attrit. Again, we're continuing to change the way we approach program depot maintenance. We're probably going to move more to what we call a time compliance tech order program, a TCTO starting in FY23, and also emergency maintenance actions, being after, again, those things that are going to be heavy hitters for nuclear capability and mission capability to keep our fleet on alert, especially during the transition time frame when we're converting sites to GBSD. We're also going to try and move to more of for a sustainability standpoint with our supply chain partners, rather than finding, sorry, I'm still on that. Yeah. We're going to look at more predictive measures for supply chain and components that are eating our lunch today and driving MICAPs, things like the voice control panel on the weapon systems controller, or our motor generators in the launch facilities that are at their end of life. We only have one or two of these assets on the shelf as in the supply chain. So we want to move to more of a reactive, a predictive measure rather than a reactive one for the supply chain as we sustain the system. The panel talked about stable funding. That was like the number one thing we need to sustain this weapon system. So I will foot stomp and wholeheartedly agree with that statement. We have a saying in the Air Force Nuke Weapons Center that the nuke enterprise is number one in DoD priority, but it's number one in speeches, not necessarily in funding and people. So we really want to make sure that if we truly are the number one capability or priority for the DoD, and we know modernization is one of our Chief of Staff of the Air Force's number one priorities, 3 priorities, that the money follows that. So I can honestly say, I heard F-35 talked about earlier today. We do compete with O&M dollars every year for sustainment with the F-35 program office, our team. And that's something internally we just have to work at and make sure we're putting our resources and prioritizations in the right places. So I want to talk next a little bit about digital tools. So it's not on the chart, but when we talk about sustainment and transition and deactivation, demil, and disposal, the way we're getting after that in the Minuteman III program office, we're taking a page out of GBSD's books. We're not just using digital engineering because it's cool, because it's popular, but as you heard from Greg Manuel and others at Northrop, we are doing this as part of the digital trinity. We are doing it because it is necessary. Okay, I think that's important to say we are applying digital sustainment and digital engineering principles and efforts and resources today in the Minuteman III SPO out of necessity. Now, that necessity is really twofold. The first is transition. Actually, it's threefold. Transition. Transition is transitioning from Minuteman III to GBSD as we begin over the next decade. We use digital tools, visualization, and things like that to inform Northrop Grumman's order of service for how they're going to go out and convert which sites when. Water intrusion, power consumption, all those kind of, we need digital tools to help guide and tell us which ones we need to go deactivate and demail first to get out of the way for GBSD to come online. Okay. We need better predictive maintenance, common operating pictures for folks out in the missile wings for their, what we call their WOCs or their MMOCs, the MOCs, for situation awareness. We need to reduce efforts today out in the field where what the feedback we get from the missile wing commanders and the maintenance group commanders is they're spending a ton of time on what they call exploratory maintenance. So those of you who are former ICBMers, you know there's things called GIMMers, which are alerts for something when something goes down. GIMMER 5, for example, when your diesel electric unit goes down, it could be 10 things. We need industry, and we need to put resources on how do we help the field put sensors on some of this equipment so they don't send out teams for wasted effort for valuable resources to do exploratory maintenance. That's how we're using digital, is we can predict that better and come up more from that analog age to the digital age, like I heard earlier. The second thing, I heard the last panel talk about one repository, a digital library. We're doing that in Minuteman. Everything you see in GBSD with digital is works off of something called Teamcenter. Teamcenter PLM, our product lifecycle management system. It's our digital library with today's weapon system, Minuteman III. We are taking, no kidding, 1960s, 70s 2D drawings and uploading them as 3D drawings into this digital library. And oh, by the way, it's migrating to a secure data cloud. That's done today. I just don't know if a lot of people know that. It's pretty cool because we have a single common workflow. We have 3D models. Somebody talked earlier about training. We can help the first time somebody ever sees an ICBM to do some maintenance on it. They can do an augmented reality with some type of 3D training using this system. If someone in the field says, hey, where is my emergency action technical request, ETAR, they can go in, look at the workflow on Teamcenter and know exactly whose desk it's on. That's how we're getting after digital for an aging system. And those who think this is just, we've done it for years this way, the paradigm and culture we're trying to change with the young folks is we're bringing 21st century tools into a 58-year-old weapon system to make life easier for operators, maintainers, and training environments. And also to inform GBSD for the transition risk, like I talked about. Okay, so that's kind of how we're doing digital, and we need funding, and we need people, and we need energy to do all that in the SPO, and we are. Finally, that bullet under transition where it says the drawdown schedule of Minuteman III will mirror the deployment schedule or conversion schedule of GBSD. I like to say it's more aligning and supporting with that, because the last thing we want to do in Minuteman is be on GBSD's critical path. It is so important for them to meet their milestone. As you heard, they've used digital over the last several years, to Colonel Bartolome's credit, to meet all of their milestones and get through milestone B. So we need to do the same thing, is we need to stay at that pace and keep that focus. To keep, again, during this conversion, as you're walking your dog and giving it a bath at the same time, the missile wings have to keep 400 sites or missiles 24/7, 365 on alert. Okay. Last topic I'm going to talk about before I end here is, go to the next chart, please. We're hearing a lot from our new Congress, OSD and others. Why don't we just slept Minuteman III another 10, 15, 20 years and delay GBSD, right? We hear this a lot. So this is just a baseline, everybody, that the last time we've completed a SLEP-like activity on Minuteman III, it all finished in 2010, and that was with our safety enhanced reentry vehicle program, which completed in 2010. Sorry, I lost my light again. There we go. Sorry. But anyhow, what we did with that, that finished in 2010 on the reentry side. We did a similar SLEP program on both the propulsion and the ground replacement programs, but those completed in 2008. We did a major maintenance effort called Rivet Mile, which got after some life cycle costs. That finished in 2016, but that was not a full up SLEP program. Our SLEP program on the books for Minuteman III is GBSD. So that's kind of our strategic message to the community, to the enterprise, and to our Congress. So I guess what I'm saying is we can SLEP, but it's not viable, and it doesn't bring the STRATCOM requirements. It doesn't get the capabilities. It doesn't get after safety and security. And not to mention, it costs $30+ billion more. And we've recently refined that estimate with the highest levels in the Air Force that it's that big of a bill to SLEP this system again, to do a full up thing. If we were to go out to industry and say, okay, how do we reconstitute all these production lines and basically resurrect an industrial base and suppliers, that's a huge task. And we are not going down that path. We made the decision 6 years ago not to do that. So every year we wait, it just gets more and more expensive. Okay, last chart. So again, the viability. The way I like to talk to this one here is really just say, it's less safe, secure, and doesn't meet warfighter capability. The Minuteman III SLEP wouldn't meet the timeline either. We did some assumptions in the program office and in the Nuke Weapons Center that if we were to SLEP Minuteman III again, by the time we did a similar TMRR phase and then a development phase like GBSD is going through right now, we would be looking at capability not hitting the street until the early 2030s, which is past that age out curve to where we start dropping below the 400 missiles on alert requirement from STRATCOM. So it's just not viable. It's cost prohibitive. I think I talked a lot the rest of these charts. In summary, I appreciate you listening to some of my points and concerns and initiatives we're doing in Minuteman as we get after a sustainment challenge over the next several years. We're excited to embrace the accelerate, change, or lose mentality to get after areas where we can be innovative with this weapon system without jeopardizing nuclear surety or safety. We're excited about how we're embracing digital sustainment, and we're partnering with other older systems, I'll say, that are in the sustainment phase to make sure we're going after corporately Air Force-wide processes and tools that will give us the biggest bang for the buck. And we're working very close in the nuclear enterprise with our mission partners and stakeholders in the field. We're going to make this a demand-driven focus from our maintenance group commanders and our missile wing commanders. We're excited where we're at. We know there's a challenge ahead of us. We have to keep this viable, this weapon system viable for our nation's security and deterrent for years to come. As you heard, even though we have a first launch in FY24, test launch for GBSD, we're not fielding the systems and don't have IOC until 2029. So for the next 8 years, it's Minuteman III that we have to focus and make sure that we stay laser focused with sustaining this critical weapon system. I wish I could take some questions. I don't know if I have any time to do so, but that's all I had. And I appreciate this awesome opportunity from AFA to talk about both sustainment and modernization of the ICBMs.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for your leadership. Just the professionalism that you exemplify, really, along with the deep level of experience you articulate so well, inspires. So we can't thank you. And on behalf of certainly all of us in the Air Force Association, thanks to you and your team. You know, today is what the General James Doolittle Leadership Center concept and location is all about, but it's a hub and a spoke construct. We are all about here supporting our Air Force Association leadership across 200 chapters, and especially today in Utah. You know, our secretary for our board, Rick Hartle, on our board, is right there in the neighborhood, as is Bob George, a longtime AFA leader. And they represent some 3 AFA chapters who collaborate with the Utah Defense Alliance. And so these conversations, these discussions, this connection that we hope to encourage between the senior leadership, the mid-career leadership, the newest leadership of the Department of the Air Force and their counterparts in industry is what the Doolittle Leadership Center is all about. Put another way, this is how we stay ahead of the Chinese. The secret sauce, if you will, the asymmetric advantage we have is absolutely represented today in our speakers and those that our speakers represent and lead. So we look forward to continued Doolittle Leadership Center facilitation, encouragement, empowerment, and encouragement of our chapter leadership, our volunteer leadership, which is so foundational to our Air Force Association. And thanks always to our sponsors today, I2S2, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Mantech, and Guidehouse. Your Air Force Association cannot do what we must do at a time when the peer threats to our nation are so daunting, including the Chinese and Russian peer threats. We're in this together. Our Air Force leadership, our industry leadership, and our sponsors. I hope all of you today enjoyed watching this Doolittle Leadership Center Leadership Forum, and our next event is coming soon. For your Air Force Association and the General James Doolittle Leadership Center, thank you so much for joining us. And please keep collaborating and keep fighting for dominance in our air and space forces, operating environments, and support for our incredible airmen and guardians and always their families. Have a terrific day, and may God bless.